Little girl with an IQ of 267 says 2 words in court, and the judge turns pale. The sunlight poured lazily through the blinds of Sam Kane's cramped apartment, slicing through the haze of dust and stale whiskey. His eyes flickered open, greeted by the unmistakable pounding of regret knocking against his skull. It was another morning where the memory of the previous night was as foggy as the air inside his room. The alarm clock blinked 10:42 a.m. in a glaring red. He groaned, rubbing his unshaven face as his phone vibrated violently on the nightstand. With a sigh, Sam reached for it, fully expecting it to be another creditor. But the name on the screen made his pulse quicken. Amanda Walker. His old friend. His conscience. A woman who rarely called unless trouble was brewing. Sam. Her voice was brisk, cutting through his grogginess. Put on a suit and get to the courthouse. Now. He sat up, his head spinning. Why? What's happening? They're calling in a new witness for the Healer Tech case. You'll want to see this. Sam blinked hard, trying to process her words. Healer Tech. Just the mention of the pharmaceutical giant was enough to send a wave of bitterness through him. He had spent months trying to take them down, but the case had hit one dead end after another. Every time he got close to exposing them, they slipped away, leaving him looking like a fool. Now, suddenly, there was a new witness? Who's the witness? He asked, fumbling for his pants. There was a pause on the line, and for a moment, Sam thought Amanda had hung up. But then she spoke, her voice softer, almost hesitant. A little girl, Eleanor Foster. She's only 10. By the time Sam arrived at the courthouse, the chaos was already underway. Reporters swarmed the marble steps, their cameras flashing like fireworks as they shouted questions at the lawyers pushing through the crowd. Sam ducked his head and slipped inside, his heart pounding for reasons he couldn't fully explain. The air inside was heavy, charged with anticipation. He spotted Amanda. Near the courtroom entrance, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. You made it, she said, glancing at his wrinkled tie with a smirk. Nice effort. Spare me, he muttered. Where's the girl? Amanda nodded toward the far end of the hall, where a young girl sat on a wooden bench, swinging her legs idly. She was small, almost fragile-looking, with long brown hair that fell in soft waves around her face. But it was her eyes that caught Sam off guard. Large, piercing, and far too knowing for a child her age. She wasn't crying or fidgeting like most kids would in her position. Instead, she sat perfectly still, studying the room as if she were the one deciding everyone's fate. Sam approached cautiously, unsure of what to say. Eleanor? He asked gently. She looked up, and for a brief moment, he felt as though she could see right through him. You're the lawyer, she said, simply, as if she had known he would come. Yes. My name's Sam Kane. I'm here to help you. Eleanor tilted her head, her gaze never wavering. Do you believe in justice, Mr. Kane? The question caught him off guard. I do, he replied, though the words felt heavier than he expected. Lately, justice had seemed more like a dream than a reality. She studied him for another moment before nodding. Good. Because they're going to try to stop me, but you can't let them. Before Sam could ask what she meant, the bailiff appeared, calling for everyone to enter the courtroom. Eleanor stood without hesitation, and Sam followed her inside, his mind racing. Whatever this girl knew, it had to be explosive. But what could a 10-year-old possibly say that would rattle a company as powerful as Healer Tech? The courtroom buzzed with tension as the trial resumed. The judge, an older man with a stern face and a reputation for being hard to impress, tapped his gavel to quiet the murmurs. The prosecutor wasted no time calling Eleanor to the stand, and the room fell into an uneasy silence as she took her seat. Sam watched intently as the prosecutor began his questioning, his tone gentle, but probing. Eleanor, do you know why you're here today? Yes, she said calmly. To tell the truth. The prosecutor smiled, but there was something nervous about the way he adjusted his tie. And can you tell the court where you were before you came here? In the Westboro Children's Home, Eleanor replied. Until they took me to the Healer Tech facility. A ripple of shock ran through the courtroom, but the prosecutor quickly pressed on. And what did they do to you there? Eleanor's fingers tightened around the edge of the witness stand. They said they were helping us. But they weren't. Sam leaned forward, his pulse quickening. Eleanor's voice was steady, but her words carried a weight that made the air feel heavier. The prosecutor continued asking questions, but it was clear that Eleanor wasn't revealing everything yet. She was waiting. For what? Sam didn't know. Finally, the defense attorney stood, his expression smug as he approached the witness stand. "Miss Foster," he said, his voice oozing condescension. "You're a very smart girl, aren't you?" Eleanor didn't flinch. "Yes. So smart, in fact, that you probably understand things most kids your age wouldn't. Like, how to tell a story that makes people feel sorry for you." Sam's jaw tightened. He could see where this was going. The defense was trying to paint her as a precocious liar, a child who had been coached into saying what the prosecution wanted to hear. But Eleanor didn't back down. She met the attorney's gaze head-on and said, "I don't need to make up stories. I remember everything." "Oh, I'm sure you do," the attorney sneered. "But memories can be tricky, can't they? Sometimes we think we remember things that didn't actually happen." The room held its breath as Eleanor leaned forward, slightly, her eyes never leaving the attorney's face. And then she said it. Two words that cut through the courtroom like a thunderclap. "Memory projected." The attorney froze, his smirk fading. The judge's gavel slipped from his hand, clattering against the bench as his face turned ashen. Gasps echoed through the room, followed by a flurry of whispers as people tried to make sense of what they had just heard. Sam's mind raced. Memory projected. He had heard the term before, buried deep in confidential documents during his initial investigation into healer tech. It referred to an experimental procedure designed to implant artificial memories into test subjects. But it was supposed to be classified. No one outside the company was supposed to know about it. Eleanor sat back in her chair, her expression calm as the courtroom descended into chaos. Sam could barely hear the judge, calling for order over the pounding of his own heart. He knew, in that moment, that the battle had just begun. But he also knew one thing for certain. Eleanor Foster wasn't just a witness. She was the key to unraveling everything, and someone would do anything to silence her. The courtroom was in disarray. Reporters whispered furiously into their phones, their fingers flying across screens as they rushed to break the news. The judge was slumped forward, visibly shaken, his gavel abandoned on the desk like a forgotten relic. Sam Kane, still seated in the gallery, felt a bead of sweat trickle down the back of his neck. Memory projected. 2 words. Simple, but devastating. It was more than just a phrase. It was a bombshell that could obliterate everything healer tech had spent years concealing. Eleanor Foster, a 10-year-old girl, had just cracked the walls of one of the most powerful pharmaceutical corporations in the country. But Sam knew that revealing the truth wasn't enough. Not yet. There were forces at work here. Powerful, ruthless forces that wouldn't hesitate to erase her if it meant protecting their empire. "Sam." Amanda's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She had slipped into the seat next to him, her face pale but determined. "We have to get her out of here. Now." He nodded, his mind already racing ahead. The courtroom was crawling with people, many of whom would be watching their every move. He couldn't afford to draw attention. Rising slowly, he made his way toward the exit, glancing over his shoulder just in time to see the defense attorney furiously whispering to someone on his phone. Whoever he was talking to, it wasn't good news for them. Eleanor was waiting for him near the back entrance, her small figure partially hidden behind a row of wooden benches. She looked calm. Too calm, Sam thought. But her fingers fidgeted nervously with the hem of her dress. When she saw him, she stood without a word, as if she had been expecting him all along. "Come on," he said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We're leaving." She didn't ask where they were going or why. She just followed, her tiny footsteps echoing alongside his as they slipped through the courthouse corridors. Amanda trailed behind them, her phone clutched tightly in her hand as she scanned the area for anyone who might be following. The exit door loomed. Ahead, a sliver of sunlight spilling through the crack at the bottom. Sam quickened his pace, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. Just a little farther. "Stop them!" a voice shouted from behind. Sam's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he grabbed Eleanor's hand and broke into a sprint, crashing through the exit and into the blinding afternoon light. They raced down the courthouse steps, weaving through the sea of reporters who were too busy shouting questions to notice what was happening. Amanda was right on their heels. "I parked around the corner," she yelled, pointing toward a side street. Sam didn't slow down until they reached Amanda's car, a beat-up sedan with rust along the edges. He yanked open the back door and practically shoved Eleanor inside before climbing in after her. Amanda slid into the driver's seat and peeled away from the curb, tires screeching as they rounded the corner. "Did you see who it was?" Sam asked, still breathless. Amanda shook her head, her eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. "No, but I can guess. Healer Tech probably has people watching the courthouse. If they didn't before, they do now." Eleanor sat quietly in the back seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Sam couldn't help but marvel at her composure. Most kids her age would be crying or asking 1,000 questions, but Eleanor seemed to exist in a world entirely her own, untouched by the chaos around her. He turned to her, trying to keep his voice steady. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "I knew they'd come after me." The matter-of-factness of her statement sent a chill down his spine. "Why didn't you say anything before?" "Because it wouldn't have changed anything," she replied. "They've been watching me since I left the facility. No one believed. Me until now." Sam felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He had spent so much time chasing dead ends, so many sleepless nights poring over documents that led nowhere. And all along, the key to everything had been this little girl. He leaned back against the seat, exhaling sharply. "We can't take her." "To my place," Amanda said. "It's the first place they'll look." Sam rubbed his temples, his mind racing. They needed somewhere safe, somewhere off the grid where they could regroup and figure out their next move. And then it hit him. "There's a house on Maple Lane. An old contact of mine. Used to use it as a safe house. It's been abandoned for a while, but it should still be secure." Amanda shot him a skeptical glance. "You sure it's safe?" "It's our best shot," Sam replied. "Just get us there." The house on Maple Lane was a dilapidated 2-story structure hidden behind overgrown hedges and a rusting gate. The windows were boarded up, and the porch sagged under the weight of years without maintenance. To anyone passing by, it looked like the kind of place you'd avoid at all costs. But to Sam, it was exactly what they... He jimmied the lock on the front door and pushed. It opened, the hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was stale, carrying the faint scent of mildew and dust. Amanda wrinkled her nose but said nothing as she helped Eleanor inside. Sam closed the door behind them, sliding the deadbolt into place. "We should be safe here for now," he said, though. The words felt hollow. He knew better than anyone how quickly safe could turn into compromised. Amanda dropped her bag on the floor and sank into a worn-out armchair. "Okay, now what? We can't hide here forever." "We won't," Sam assured her. "But before we can do anything, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with." He turned to Eleanor, who was standing by the window, her gaze fixed on something far beyond the overgrown yard. "Eleanor, can you tell us everything you know about the experiments?" She hesitated for a moment, then walked over to the couch and sat down, her hands resting on her knees. "They called it Project Delta," she began. "It started at the orphanage. They said they were testing new medicines to help kids with learning disabilities, but that was a lie. They used machines to put memories into our heads, memories that weren't ours. At first, they were small things, like remembering a day at the beach or a birthday party. But then they got bigger. They made us remember things that never happened, like being sick or losing someone we loved." Sam's stomach churned. The implications were horrifying. Why would they do that? "They wanted to see if they could control how we felt," Eleanor said. "If they could make us believe something bad had happened, they could see how our bodies reacted. If we got sick, they'd test new drugs on us to see if they worked." Amanda covered her mouth, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "That's monstrous." Sam leaned forward, his jaw clenched. "Do you know where they keep the records of these experiments?" Eleanor nodded. "There's a database. I heard them talk about it, but it's locked, and only a few people have access." "Who?" Sam pressed. She looked him in the eye, her voice steady. "Dr. Collins. He was in charge of the tests. If we find him, we can find the records." Sam sat back, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. "Dr. Collins. He had seen the name in his research, but the man had vanished without a trace after the investigation began. If they were going to bring healer tech down, they needed to find him, and fast. But before they could plan their next move, a faint noise outside made Sam freeze. He motioned for Amanda to stay quiet and crept toward the window, peering through a crack in the boarded-up frame. A black SUV was parked across the street, its tinted windows glinting in the fading sunlight. "They found us," he whispered. Eleanor didn't flinch. Instead, she met his gaze with a calmness that sent a shiver down his spine. "I told you they wouldn't stop." Sam's mind raced. They had to move, but where could they go that healer tech wouldn't find them? The answer, he realized, was simple. Sam's breath fogged up the window as he stared at the black SUV parked across the street. Its engine was off, the windows dark as if the vehicle itself was holding its breath. He couldn't see inside, but he knew, without a doubt, that someone was watching. His pulse pounded in his ears, drowning out every other sound. "They found us," he repeated, pulling back from the window and turning to Amanda and Eleanor. "We need to move." Amanda sprang to her feet. "Move where, Sam? They'll be expecting us to run." "I don't know," he admitted, pacing across the room. "But we can't stay here." Eleanor remained seated, her small hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the worn floorboards beneath. "They won't hurt me yet," she said softly, her voice like a ripple on still water. "Not until they're sure I've told you everything." Sam stopped pacing and stared at her. The matter-of-fact way she said it, like she had already accepted the danger, made his stomach turn. This wasn't how a child should think. She should have been worried about homework or summer vacations, not calculating how long she had before someone tried to silence her. "No one's going to hurt you," he said firmly. "I won't let them." Eleanor finally lifted her gaze to meet his, and for a moment, her expression softened. "You can't protect me forever, Mr. Kane." His jaw tightened. "I don't have to. I just need to protect you long enough to bring them down." Amanda sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "Okay, so what's the plan? We can't outrun them forever, and we're running out of places to hide." Sam thought for a moment, his mind racing through possibilities. They needed more than just a temporary escape. They needed leverage, something big enough to force healer tech into a corner. And they needed it fast. "Eleanor," he said, crouching in front of her, "you mentioned a database where they keep the records of the experiments. Do you know where it's located?" She hesitated, biting her lower lip. "I think so. They talked about it once. They said it was stored on a secure server at their main facility." "Which facility?" Amanda asked. "The one outside Westboro," Eleanor replied. "It's in the research wing, but you can't get in without an access key." Sam nodded, his mind already formulating a plan. If they could get into the facility and retrieve those records, they'd have the proof they needed to expose everything. Project Delta, the illegal experiments, the implanted memories. But breaking into a high-security building wasn't exactly something he could do on a whim. "We'll figure out how to get in," he said, standing up. "But first, we need to lose that SUV." He grabbed a backpack from the corner of the room and began stuffing it with essentials: bottled water, a flashlight, a first aid kit. Amanda helped, moving quickly but efficiently as she gathered anything useful they could find. Eleanor remained calm, watching them with an eerie stillness that made Sam wonder just how much this girl had been through. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard as they prepared to leave. Sam peered through the window again, his eyes narrowing as he studied the SUV. It hadn't moved an inch, but he could see the faint glow of a cigarette ember near the driver's side window. Someone was definitely inside, waiting. "We'll slip out through the back," he said, pulling on his jacket. "There's a trail behind the house that leads to an old service road. If we're careful, we can follow it without being seen." "And then what?" Amanda asked, zipping up her jacket. Sam hesitated, glancing at Eleanor. "We'll figure it out, one step at a time." Amanda didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. She knew as well as he did that they didn't have many options. "Stay close," Sam instructed as they made their way to the back door. He cracked it, opened slowly, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. The cool evening air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. He scanned the backyard, his eyes darting between the shadows before motioning for them to follow. Eleanor went first, her small figure disappearing into the twilight like a ghost. Amanda followed, and Sam brought up the rear, his senses on high alert as they navigated the overgrown path behind the house. Twigs snapped beneath their feet, and the distant sound of a dog barking echoed through the trees. But otherwise, the forest was eerily quiet. They had made it about halfway down the trail when Sam heard it, a low, guttural growl that sent a shiver down his spine. He spun around, his eyes scanning the darkness, but he couldn't see anything. "What is it?" Amanda whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," he replied, his hand instinctively reaching for the pocket knife in his jacket. "Keep moving." But they didn't get far. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. Sam's heart raced as he turned, his eyes finally locking onto a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face half hidden by the hood of his jacket. His movements were slow and deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. Sam could see the glint of something metallic in his hand. A gun. "Go!" Sam shouted, shoving Amanda and Eleanor forward. They broke into a sprint, the sound of their footsteps blending with the rustle of leaves and snapping branches. The man was close behind, his heavy breathing cutting through the night like a warning. Sam could hear the pounding of his own heart, could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins as he pushed himself to run faster. The trail opened up into a clearing, and Sam spotted an old service road just ahead. "This way!" he called out, leading them toward it. Amanda stumbled but caught herself, her breath coming in ragged gasps as they reached the road. A battered pickup truck was parked nearby, its owner nowhere in sight. Without hesitating, Sam yanked open the driver's side door and jumped in, hot wiring the ignition with practiced ease. The engine roared to life just as Amanda and Eleanor climbed into the back seat. "Hang on!" Sam shouted, slamming his foot on the gas. The tires kicked up gravel as the truck lurched forward, speeding down the narrow road. Sam glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the man standing at the edge of the clearing, his gun raised. A shot rang out, shattering the back window and sending shards of glass raining down on them. "Keep your heads down!" Sam yelled, swerving to avoid a fallen tree. The truck barreled down the road, the sound of gunfire fading into the distance. Sam's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white as he navigated the twists and turns. Beside him, Amanda was shaking, her fingers clutching the seatbelt like a lifeline. Eleanor, however, was silent. She sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, as if she had already calculated every possible outcome. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the main highway. Sam exhaled shakily, easing off the gas as they merged into traffic. "Did we lose him?" Amanda asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam nodded. For now. But he knew it wouldn't be long before they were found again. Healer Tech had resources, more than he could imagine, and they wouldn't stop until Eleanor was back in their custody. As the city lights flickered in the ice distance, Sam's mind raced. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. "We're going to Westboro," he said, glancing at Eleanor in the rearview mirror. "We're going to find that facility and get those records." Eleanor met his gaze, her expression unreadable, but there was a spark of determination in her eyes, a spark that told him she wasn't giving up. Neither was he. The truck's tires hummed against the highway as the city lights of Westboro came into view, flickering like distant stars on the horizon. Inside the cab, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken fears, the tension so thick it felt like a living thing, curling around them in the dark. Sam kept his eyes on the road, one hand gripping the steering wheel while the other tapped against his knee in a restless rhythm. Beside him, Amanda leaned her head against the window, her breath fogging up the glass as she stared out into the night. In the back seat, Eleanor sat in silence, her small frame hunched slightly forward as she traced invisible shapes on her knees with her finger. She hadn't spoken since they fled the safe house, and Sam could feel the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her tiny shoulders. He didn't need her to say anything to know what she was thinking. He was thinking, it too. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting an invisible clock, and time wasn't on their side. "We can't just barge into the Healer Tech facility," Amanda said, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, but laced with frustration. We don't even know how to get past security, let alone where to find the server room. This isn't some movie, Sam. We're not invincible. I know that, Sam replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. But we don't have a choice. We do have a choice, Amanda argued. We can go to the police, tell them everything we know, and let them handle it. They have the resources. They can protect Eleanor better than we can. Sam's grip on the wheel tightened. The same police who buried my last investigation when Healer Tech paid them off? The same system that's protected them for years while kids like Eleanor suffered? No. We can't trust them. Not yet. Amanda sighed and ran a hand through her hair. You're putting everything on the line for this, Sam. What happens if we fail? Then we don't fail, he said, his voice hardening. We can't afford to. A small voice from the back seat broke through the tension like a whisper in a storm. I don't want to go to the police, Eleanor said, her gaze still fixed on her lap. Amanda turned in her seat, surprised. Eleanor, you'd be safe with them. They'd protect you. They'd lock me in a room, Eleanor replied softly. I'd just be a case file to them. Another number they wouldn't understand, wouldn't what Healer Tech did to me. But Sam does. Sam felt the weight of her words settle over him like a blanket, warm and suffocating at the same time. He wasn't sure he deserved her trust, but hearing it gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. Amanda hesitated before turning back to face the front. You're making this personal, she said quietly. You know that, right? It is personal, Sam admitted. They destroyed my brother. They're not going to get away with destroying her too. They pulled into the parking lot of a rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. Its neon vacancy sign flickering like a dying heartbeat. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and rain, and the pavement was slick beneath their shoes as they made their way to the room. Sam checked them in under a fake name, something he'd learned to do during his early years working as a private investigator. The room was small and musty, with peeling wallpaper and a single flickering lamp casting shadows against the wall. Eleanor climbed onto the bed without a word, curling up on her side with her back to them. Amanda sat down at the small table near the window, scrolling through phone in search of anything useful. Blueprints, employee rosters, security protocols, anything that could give them an edge. Sam paced the room, his mind racing through possible scenarios. He knew the facility would be heavily guarded, but he also knew that most security systems had blind spots. If they could find one, they might have a chance of slipping inside undetected. We need an inside man, Amanda said, breaking his train of thought. Sam stopped pacing and looked at her. What do you mean? Someone who knows the layout of the building, she explained. Someone who can tell us where the server room is, what kind of security we'll be facing, and how to bypass it. Without that, we're walking in blind. Sam ran a hand over his face, exhaustion creeping into his bones. I don't know anyone on the inside. But I do, Amanda said, her eyes narrowing as she pulled up a contact on her phone. Dr. Collins. Sam's breath hitched. You found him? She nodded. I did some digging after we fled the safe house. He's been laying low, but I found a recent photo of him outside a diner near Westboro. If he's still there, we might be able to convince him to help us. Sam's mind raced. Collins was the key. He knew it. If they could get to him, they could unlock the entire conspiracy. But there was a catch. Do you think he'll cooperate? Sam asked. Amanda hesitated. That depends on what you're willing to offer him. He's not exactly the type to help out of the goodness of his heart. Sam clenched his jaw. He knew what she meant. Collins would want something in return, something Sam might not be able to give. But he didn't have a choice. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, he said finally. Where's the diner? About 20 miles from here, Amanda replied. We can be there by morning. Sam nodded and sat down on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. We'll leave at dawn. Get some rest. Amanda gave him a tired smile. You should take your own advice, Sam. He chuckled softly. I will. Eventually. The room fell into an uneasy silence as Amanda stretched out on the other bed and Eleanor's breathing slowed, signaling that she had finally fallen asleep. But Sam couldn't rest. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one pulling him in a different direction. What if Collins refused to help? What if they couldn't find the server room? In time? What if healer tech caught up to them before they had a chance to expose the truth? The weight of it all pressed down on him, suffocating. He stood and quietly slipped outside, the cool night air biting at his skin as he lit a cigarette with shaking hands. The glow of the motel's neon sign reflected off the puddles on the ground, casting eerie shadows that danced like ghosts. Sam took a drag and exhaled slowly, watching the smoke curl into the air before disappearing into the night. He thought of his brother, the way he had looked in his hospital bed, his body frail and broken after being one of Healer Tech's early test subjects. Sam had tried to save him, but by the time he figured out what had happened, it was too late. His brother was gone, and the company responsible had walked away without so much as a slap on the wrist. But this time would be different. This time, he had a chance to make things right. As he flicked the cigarette away and turned to head back inside, a noise caught his attention. A soft rustling from the bushes near the edge of the parking lot. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Someone was watching. Without making a sound, he moved back toward the door, his hand reaching for the pocketknife in his jacket. But before he could react, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a dark hoodie, his face obscured by the dim light. Sam's breath hitched as the man took a step forward. "I wouldn't make any sudden moves if I were you," the man said, his voice low and menacing. Healer Tech doesn't like loose ends. Sam's blood ran cold. The sun barely peeked over the horizon, casting pale streaks of gold across the cracked asphalt as Sam guided the truck onto the dirt road leading to the diner Amanda had mentioned. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and wildflowers. But despite the calm of the countryside, the tension in the truck was palpable. Eleanor sat silently in the back, her hands clutching the backpack in her lap like it was a life raft keeping her afloat. Amanda, sitting beside Sam, had barely spoken since they left the motel. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of the tires on the road, a steady pulse that matched the racing beat of Sam's heart. He couldn't shake the image of the man in the hoodie from last night, the way his voice had cut through the darkness like a blade, the threat lingering in the air long after he disappeared back into the shadows. Healer Tech doesn't like loose ends. Sam gritted his teeth and tightened his grip on the steering wheel. They were getting closer to something big. He could feel it. But that also meant the walls were closing in faster than ever. "There it is," Amanda said, breaking the silence as she pointed toward a small roadside diner up ahead. Its neon sign flickered weakly, struggling to stay lit against the dawn's early light. The building itself was unassuming, with faded red paint peeling from the walls and a row of empty stools visible through the front window. A lone pickup truck was parked outside. Sam pulled into the lot and killed the engine, taking a moment to steady himself before turning to Eleanor. "Stay in the truck," he said. "Lock the doors and don't open them for anyone but us." Eleanor nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "Be careful." "We will," Sam promised, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Amanda and Sam stepped out of the truck and made their way toward the diner, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel. The door creaked as they pushed it open, the smell of fried bacon and stale coffee greeting them like an old memory. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. A waitress in a faded uniform leaned against the counter, flipping through a magazine, while an elderly man in a trucker hat sipped his coffee in the corner booth. But it wasn't the waitress or the trucker that caught Sam's attention. It was the man sitting in the booth by the window, his face partially hidden behind a menu, Dr. Collins. He looked older than the last photo Amanda had shown him, with graying hair and tired eyes that seemed to scan the room every few seconds, as if he were waiting for someone, or running from them. "That's him," Amanda whispered. Sam nodded and walked toward the booth, sliding into the seat across from Collins without waiting for an invitation. Amanda stood nearby, her arms crossed, scanning the room for any signs of trouble. Collins lowered the menu and raised an eyebrow. "You've got guts," he said, his voice low but laced with amusement. "Not many people would walk up to me like this without backup." Sam leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I'm not most people. I need your help." Collins chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "And why would I help you?" "Because we're your best shot at making this right," Sam said. "We know about Project Delta. We know about the memory implants, the experiments on kids. We have a witness who was part of it, and we're going to bring Healer Tech down. But we need you to help us get inside." Collins's smile faded, and for a moment, his eyes darted toward the door, as if he were calculating his chances of making a quick escape. "I don't think you understand what you're asking," he said. "If Healer Tech finds out I've been talking to you, I'm dead." "They already know you're a liability," said, stepping closer. "Do you really think hiding out in diners is going to keep you safe? They'll find you. Eventually. The only way to protect yourself is to help us expose them." Collins's fingers tapped against the edge of the table, a nervous rhythm that betrayed his inner turmoil. Sam could see the fear in his eyes, but he could also see something else: regret. "You worked on Project Delta," Sam pressed. "You saw what they did to those kids. Don't tell me you don't feel guilty." Collins's jaw clenched, and for a moment, Sam thought he was going to walk away. But then the older man let out a long sigh and leaned back in his seat, rubbing his hands over his face. "Fine," he muttered. But need to understand something. The facility you're talking about, it's not just some corporate office with cubicles and servers. It's a fortress. They've got guards, biometric scanners, cameras in every hallway. You can't just waltz in and expect to walk out alive." Sam's stomach churned, but he kept his expression neutral. "Then tell us how to get past all of that." Collins hesitated, his fingers drumming against the table again. "There's a service entrance on the east side of the building," he said finally. "It's used for deliveries, and the security there is lighter than the main entrance. But you'll still need an access key to get past the first checkpoint." "Where do we get one?" Amanda asked. Collins glanced around the diner, lowering his voice. "There's a technician named Marcus who works the night shift. He's the one who usually checks the deliveries. If you can get to him, you might be able to convince him to give you his key." Sam didn't like the sound of convince, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. "And once we're inside?" "There's a server room on the lower level," Collins explained. "That's where they keep the digital records, but be warned, it's monitored 24/7. If you trigger any alarms, you'll have about 2 minutes before security locks down the entire building." 2 minutes. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Sam leaned back in his seat, letting Collins's words sink in. They had a plan, barely, but it was enough to give him a sliver of hope. Collins reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the table. "Here. It's a rough sketch of the building layout. Don't expect it to be perfect, but it'll give you an idea of what you're up against." Sam took the paper and tucked it into his jacket. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice softening. "Why now?" Collins's gaze dropped to the table, and for a moment he didn't answer. When he finally looked up, there was a sadness in his eyes that Sam hadn't seen before. "Because I made a mistake," he said quietly. "I thought I was helping people, but all I did was ruin lives. If helping you can undo even a fraction of the damage I caused, then maybe it's worth the risk." Sam nodded, the weight of Collins's words settling over him like a heavy blanket. He stood and extended his hand. "Thank you." Collins hesitated before shaking it. "Just don't get yourselves killed. And if you do, don't come back to haunt me." Back in the truck, Eleanor was waiting with her hands pressed against the window, watching them approach. Sam climbed into the driver's seat and handed Amanda the sketch Collins had given him. "We have a way in," he said. "But it's risky." Amanda studied the map, her brow furrowing. "Risky is an understatement." Eleanor leaned forward between the seats, her voice soft but steady. "We'll make it work." Sam glanced at her in the rearview mirror and saw the determination in her eyes. He knew she was right. They didn't have any other choice. As he started the engine and pulled back onto the road, his mind was already racing ahead, calculating their next move. They were one step closer to the truth, but the danger was only beginning. And deep down, Sam knew the next step would be the most dangerous one yet. The road ahead was slick from an early morning drizzle, the rain clinging to the windshield in droplets that slid down like tears. Sam gripped the steering wheel tighter as he navigated through the winding streets leading them out of the countryside and back toward Westboro, with the sketch from Collins now tucked safely in Amanda's backpack. The plan was starting to take shape, but the weight of what lay ahead was suffocating. In the back seat, Eleanor was unusually quiet, her head resting against the window as she watched the rain blur the trees whizzing past. Her face, reflected in the glass, looked far too serious for a child. Sam hated that she had been forced to grow up this fast. He hated that he couldn't shield her from this. Beside him, Amanda flipped through her phone, scanning Collins's notes and any online maps of the facility she could find. "This place is a fortress," she muttered. "Even with the delivery entrance, we'll need a miracle to get past security without getting caught." Sam exhaled through his nose. "We've done harder things before." Amanda gave him a sideways glance. "Have we?" "Okay, maybe not," he admitted. "But we've come this far. And we've got Collins's intel. That's more than we had yesterday." Eleanor shifted in her seat, leaning forward. "Marcus, the technician. How do we find him?" Sam met her gaze in the rearview mirror. "Collins said Marcus works the night shift. He's the one who checks deliveries at the east entrance. If we wait outside the facility tonight, we can catch him before he clocks in." "And then what?" Amanda asked. Sam's jaw tightened. "Then we convince him to hand over his access key." Amanda snorted softly. "Convince him, huh? You make it sound so simple." "It's never simple," Sam said, glancing at her. "But we'll make it work." The truck fell into silence again. The sound of the rain and the hum of the tires the only things filling the space. Sam's mind was racing ahead, trying to account for every possible variable. What if Marcus refused to cooperate? What if security caught them before they even reached the server room? What if— He forced himself to stop. Overthinking wouldn't help them now. "Are you scared?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. Sam glanced at her in the mirror again, surprised by the question. She wasn't looking at him, staring down at her hands, her fingers fiddling with the straps of her backpack. "Yeah," he admitted. "I am." Eleanor nodded as if she expected that answer. "I am too," she said softly. Amanda turned in her seat to face her. "You've been through worse than this, haven't you?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. Instead, she pressed her forehead against the window, watching the rain slide down like a curtain. "When they put the fake memories in my head, I couldn't tell what was real anymore. I remembered things that never happened, like losing a dog I never had, or watching someone I loved die. It felt real, though. It hurt like it was real." Sam felt his chest tighten. He wanted to say something comforting, but what could he say? That it wasn't her fault? That she wasn't alone? Those words felt hollow in the face of what she had endured. "They can't hurt you like that again," Amanda said, and firmly. "Not if we stop them." Eleanor lifted her head from the window and nodded, her eyes glistening. "Then we have to win." "We will," Sam said, more to himself than anyone else. They arrived in Westboro just after noon. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving the streets slick and shining under the overcast sky. Sam parked the truck in the back lot of a small cafe near the industrial district, where the towering silhouette of the HealerTech facility loomed in the distance. Amanda pulled out Collins's sketch and laid it across the small cafe table as they huddled in the corner, sipping lukewarm coffee and mapping out their plan. The diner was mostly empty, except for an older couple seated near the window and a bored waitress scrolling through her phone behind the counter. "Here's the east entrance," Amanda said, tapping the sketch with her finger. "This is where Marcus will be. But even if we get his key, we'll still have to get past the guards inside. We'll need to disable the security cameras long enough to reach the server room." "I'll handle the cameras," Sam said. "I've dealt with systems like this before. They usually have a blind spot near the maintenance tunnels." "And once we're in the server room?" Amanda asked. Sam looked at Eleanor. "That's where you come in. You'll need to access the files and download everything related to Project Delta. Can you do that?" Eleanor nodded, her expression serious. "I can do it." "Good," Sam said. "We'll have about 2 minutes before the system notices the breach. If we don't get out by then, we're trapped." Amanda sighed and leaned back in her chair. "This is insane." "Maybe," Sam said, "but it's the only shot we've got." By the time night fell, the HealerTech facility was lit up like a fortress, its perimeter lined with bright floodlights and security cameras that swiveled in slow mechanical arcs. Sam parked the truck a few blocks away, hidden behind a row of abandoned warehouses. They waited in silence, the minutes dragging by like hours. Sam kept his eyes on the service entrance, watching for any sign of Marcus. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears like a drum roll. "There," Amanda whispered, pointing toward the gate. A man in a gray uniform was walking toward the service entrance, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He looked about 30, with a nervous energy that reminded Sam of someone who always expected trouble but never knew when it would strike. "That's him," Sam said. They climbed out of the truck, moving quickly but quietly as they approached him from behind. When they were close enough, Sam called out, "Marcus." The man froze, spinning around with wide eyes. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" "We're not here to hurt you," Sam said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "We just need your help." Marcus's gaze darted between them, his fingers tightening around the strap of his duffel bag. "I don't know what you're talking about. Leave me alone." "We know about Project Delta," Amanda said, stepping forward. "We know what Healer Tech did to those kids. We're trying to stop them." Marcus's face went pale. "You have no idea what you're getting yourselves into. They'll kill you." "They'll kill you too," Sam said. "You're a loose end, Marcus. Just like us." Marcus hesitated, fear flickering across his face. Sam could see the wheels turning in his head, the battle between self-preservation and guilt playing out in real time. Finally, he exhaled shakily and dropped his duffel bag to the ground. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your access key," Sam said. Marcus nodded and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small key card. "This will get you through the first checkpoint. After that, you're on your own." Sam took the key and slipped it into his jacket. "Thank you." Marcus swallowed hard and backed away, his hands trembling. "Good luck," he said before turning and disappearing into the night. Sam stood there for a moment, the weight of what they were about to do settling over him like a heavy fog. He turned to Amanda and Eleanor. "This is it," he said. "No turning back." Eleanor nodded, her small hand tightening around her backpack. "I'm ready." Amanda took a deep breath. "Let's do this." As they made their way toward the facility, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But it didn't matter anymore. They had come too far to stop. Now. The night air was thick with tension as Sam, Amanda, and Eleanor moved through the shadows, their footsteps muffled by the damp ground beneath them. The distant hum of generators and the rhythmic sweep of security cameras filled the silence, a constant reminder of the danger they were walking into. Sam's heart pounded in sync with each step, but he forced himself to stay calm. One mistake could cost them everything. The east service entrance came into view, a steel door illuminated by a dim overhead light. A lone guard stood nearby, his back turned as he smoked a cigarette. Sam watched the glowing ember flicker, the only movement in the otherwise still night. "This is the blind spot Collins mentioned," Amanda whispered, crouching beside him behind a cluster of shrubs. "Once we're inside, it's a straight shot to the maintenance tunnel." Sam nodded, his gaze locked on the guard. "We wait until he turns around. Then we go." Eleanor knelt next to him, clutching her backpack tightly. She was calm, eerily so, but Sam could see the tension in the way her fingers gripped the straps. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded. "I've been ready for this." Sam admired her strength, even though it tore him apart to see a child bear the weight of something so dangerous. "Stick close to Amanda," he said. "We'll get in and out before they know we're here." The guard flicked his cigarette to the ground, stomping on it before turning toward the parking lot. His shadow stretched long across the pavement, and as soon as he was far enough away, Sam motioned for them to move. They sprinted to the door, crouching low as Sam swiped Marcus's keycard across the access panel. The light blinked green, and the lock clicked open with a soft beep. Sam held the door open, ushering Amanda and Eleanor inside before slipping in after them. He closed the door quietly, listening for any sign of pursuit. Nothing. The corridor ahead was dimly lit, its walls lined with exposed pipes and flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. The smell of disinfectant and machine oil filled the air, sharp and industrial. It felt like a tomb, cold and suffocating. "This way," Sam whispered, leading them toward the maintenance tunnel. The tunnel was narrow, the ceiling low enough that Sam had to duck slightly as they moved through it. Pipes ran along the walls, hissing softly as steam escaped through small vents. The sound of their footsteps echoed, creating a rhythm that made Sam's skin prickle. Every noise felt too loud, like a signal to the guards that they were coming. Amanda checked the map Collins had given them, her phone casting a faint glow over the paper. "We're almost there," she said. "The server room is on the lower level, just beyond this tunnel." Eleanor's eyes darted around the tunnel, her breathing steady but shallow. "How many guards will be there?" "Not many," Sam replied. "Most of the security will be at the main entrance. But we still need to be careful. If we trigger any alarms, it's over." Eleanor nodded, her small fingers brushing against the zipper of her backpack as if to remind herself that she was ready. "I can do it. I know I can." Sam believed her. He had to. They didn't have a backup plan. As they reached the end of the tunnel, Sam pressed his ear against the door leading to the server room corridor. He heard nothing but the faint hum of machines, a sound that both reassured and unnerved him. He gestured for Amanda and Eleanor to stay back as he cracked the door open and peeked outside. The corridor was empty, just as Collins had promised. The walls were lined with surveillance cameras, but Sam knew where the blind spots were. They had about 30 seconds to make it past the cameras before the next rotation. "Let's go," he whispered. They slipped into the corridor, moving quickly but quietly as they hugged the wall. Amanda kept an eye on the cameras, signaling when they were clear to move. Sam's pulse raced, but he forced himself to focus on each step, each breath, each second that ticked by. When they reached the door to the server room, Sam swiped the keycard again, praying it would work. The light blinked green. He pushed the door open, and they slipped inside, the door clicking shut behind them. The room was larger than he had expected, with rows of towering server racks humming softly under the glow of overhead lights. The temperature was colder here, the air conditioned to keep the servers from overheating. Eleanor set her backpack down and pulled out a small laptop. Her hands moved quickly, connecting cables and typing commands into the console. Sam and Amanda stood guard near the door, listening for any sign of movement outside. "How long do you need?" Sam asked. 2 minutes, Eleanor replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Maybe less." Sam nodded, his eyes scanning the room. Everything about this felt too easy. He had expected more resistance, more security. But the silence was unnerving, like the calm before a storm. Amanda seemed to sense it, too. "Something's not right," she whispered. "Where are the guards?" Sam admitted, his hand instinctively moving to the pocket knife in his jacket. "But stay alert." Eleanor's typing grew more frantic as the progress bar on her laptop filled. "I'm almost there. Just a few more seconds." Sam's breath hitched when he heard it. The distant sound of footsteps, faint but growing louder. He exchanged a glance with Amanda, who nodded grimly. "They know we're here," she said. "Eleanor, we have to go," Sam urged, his voice low but firm. "I just need 10 more seconds." She replied, her fingers blurring across the keyboard. The footsteps were getting closer, and Sam could hear voices now, sharp, commanding voices giving orders. His pulse pounded in his ears as he counted down silently. 10 seconds. 9. 8. The door handle jiggled. "Sam!" Amanda hissed. 7. 6. Sam braced himself, his hand tightening around the pocket knife. 5. The progress bar on Eleanor's laptop hit 100%, and she yanked the cables free, shoving everything back into her backpack. "Got it!" she whispered. Sam grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the door. "Go now." Amanda opened the door a crack, peeking outside before signaling them to move. They sprinted down the corridor, their footsteps pounding against the tiled floor as the sound of pursuit grew closer. Sam didn't look back. He couldn't. He focused on the path ahead, on the next turn, on the exit that seemed so far away. The maintenance tunnel was just ahead when a sharp voice called out behind them. "Stop!" Sam spun around just as a guard raised his weapon. Without thinking, Sam lunged forward, slamming the door to the maintenance tunnel shut just as a shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off the wall inches from his head. "Go!" he shouted to Amanda and Eleanor. They bolted down the tunnel, the echo of their footsteps blending with the distant sound of alarms. Sam followed, his lungs burning and his heart threatening to burst out of his chest. He could hear the guards behind them, but the tunnel twisted and turned, buying them precious seconds. The service entrance was in sight when Amanda stumbled, her ankle twisting as she cried out in pain. Sam doubled back, wrapping an arm around her and practically dragging her toward the exit. Eleanor held the door open, her face pale but determined. They burst into the night, the cool air hitting them like a wave of relief. Sam didn't stop running until they reached the truck, shoving Amanda and Eleanor inside before climbing into the driver's seat. He turned the key, the engine roaring to life as he floored the gas pedal, sending them speeding down the road. As they left the facility behind, Sam exhaled shakily, his hands trembling against the steering wheel. Amanda clutched her ankle, wincing in pain, while Eleanor sat silently, clutching her backpack like it held the world's most precious secret. "What did you get?" Sam asked, his voice hoarse. Eleanor opened her backpack and pulled out the laptop, her eyes shining with determination. "Everything," she said. "Names, locations, dates, everything they did. We have it all." Sam felt a surge of relief, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of what they had to do next. The truth was out, but now they had to survive long enough to expose it. The truck roared down the deserted highway, its tires splashing through puddles from the earlier rain. The distant glow of the Healer Tech facility was nothing more than a memory now, fading into the horizon behind them. But Sam knew that distance wouldn't save them. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. Amanda groaned in the passenger seat, her hands clutching her ankle. Her face was twisted in pain, and beads of sweat clung to her forehead. Sam stole a quick glance at her, concern tightening his chest. "How bad is it?" he asked, keeping one eye on the road. "It's not broken," she muttered through clenched teeth. "But it's bad enough to slow me down." Sam gritted his teeth. Slowing down wasn't an option, not when Healer Tech's security team was likely combing the roads for them. "We'll stop soon and get you patched up," he said. "But right now, we need to put as much distance between us and that facility as possible." In the back seat, Eleanor clutched the laptop to her chest like a lifeline. Her wide eyes flicked nervously between the rearview mirror and the dark road ahead. "Do you think they'll catch up to us?" Sam's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "Not if I can help it." The words felt like a promise, but he knew how fragile promises could be. The rain had stopped, but the air remained damp and heavy, clinging to their clothes and skin like a second layer. After nearly an hour of driving, Sam spotted an old gas station up ahead, its flickering neon sign casting an eerie glow over the cracked pavement. The place looked abandoned, with rusted fuel pumps and a boarded-up convenience store. But it was exactly what they needed, a place to regroup, if only for a few minutes. "We'll stop here," Sam said, pulling into the lot and cutting the engine. Amanda winced as she tried to get out of the truck, but Sam was at her side in an instant, wrapping an arm around her waist to help her stand. "Let's get you inside," he said. The door to the convenience store creaked as Sam pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty space. The shelves were mostly bare, covered in a thin layer of dust, and the smell of mildew lingered in the air. Sam helped Amanda to a bench near the window and gently lowered her onto it. Eleanor hovered nearby, her eyes darting around the store as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. "Is this place safe?" "For now," Sam said, kneeling in front of Amanda to examine her ankle. He pulled off her shoe carefully, and she hissed in pain. Her ankle was swollen, but there was no sign of a fracture. "You'll need to ice this, but you should be able to walk." Amanda nodded, wiping the sweat from her brow. "I've had worse." Sam gave her a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Eleanor, see if you can find any first aid supplies. There might be something useful left behind." Eleanor nodded and disappeared down one of the aisles, her footsteps barely making a sound. As Sam wrapped Amanda's ankle with a strip of cloth he found on the floor, she winced but didn't complain. "What's the plan, Sam?" she asked, her voice low. "We have the data, but where do we go from here?" Sam sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on his jeans. "We need to get this information to someone who can do something with it. The media, maybe. A whistleblower organization. Someone outside Healer Tech's reach." "Do you know anyone like that?" Amanda asked, raising an eyebrow. Sam hesitated. There was one person, an old contact from his days as a private investigator, someone who had connections in the media and wasn't afraid to take risks. But trusting him meant opening up old wounds, and Sam wasn't sure he was ready for that. "There's someone," he said finally. "But it's complicated." Amanda sighed. "Isn't it always?" Before Sam could respond, Eleanor came running back with a small box of bandages and a dusty bottle of antiseptic. "This was all I could find," she said, holding them out to Sam. "Good work," he said, taking the supplies and setting them aside for later. But before he could relax, a noise outside made his blood run cold. The low rumble of an approaching engine. Sam shot to his feet, his heart pounding as he peered through the dirty window. A black SUV rolled into the lot, its headlights off, moving slowly like a predator stalking its prey. "They found us," Sam whispered, his breath catching in his throat. Amanda's eyes widened. "How?" "We drove for miles. They must have tracked us." "Somehow," Sam said, his mind racing. "We need to move, now." Eleanor clutched his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "Where do we go?" Sam scanned the room, searching for an exit. The back door was boarded up, but it looked like the wood was rotting. If they could break through it, they might be able to slip away before the men in the SUV realized they were here. "This way," he said, grabbing Amanda's arm and helping her to her feet. They moved quickly, Eleanor leading the way as Sam supported Amanda. The door creaked loudly as he pushed against it, but the wood gave way after a few hard shoves. They stumbled out into the night, the cool air hitting them like a slap to the face. Sam could hear voices behind them now. Sharp, urgent voices barking orders. The men were close. Too close. "There's a forest up ahead," Amanda said, pointing toward the dark line of trees in the distance. "If we can make it there, we'll have cover." Sam didn't hesitate. "Run!" Eleanor sprinted ahead, her small frame disappearing into the shadows as Sam and Amanda followed as fast as they could. The ground was uneven, littered with rocks and debris, but Sam didn't slow down. His only focus was getting Eleanor to safety. Gunfire shattered the night, the sharp cracks echoing through the empty landscape. Sam's breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed forward, his muscles burning with the effort. Beside him, Amanda limped but didn't stop, her determination keeping her moving. The trees loomed closer, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Sam could hear the men behind them, their footsteps pounding against the ground. He glanced over his shoulder and saw the flash of a flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Almost there!" he shouted. They reached the tree line just as another shot rang out, splintering the bark of a nearby tree. Sam ducked, pulling Amanda down with him as they crouched behind a fallen log. Eleanor was already there, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she tried to catch her breath. "What now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Sam wiped the sweat from his brow, his mind racing. They couldn't stay here for long. The men would find them eventually. But running blindly through the forest wasn't an option either. Amanda leaned against the log, her face pale but determined. "We need a distraction." Sam's eyes scanned the area, searching for anything they could use. His gaze landed on a cluster of rocks nearby, and an idea formed in his mind. "Eleanor," he said, turning to her, "can you make it to the other side of the clearing and hide there?" She nodded, her eyes wide but fearless. "When I say go, run as fast as you can," Sam said. "I'll draw their attention." Amanda grabbed his arm. "Sam, that's suicide." "I'll be fine," he said, though his heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. "Just trust me." He picked up one of the rocks and hurled it into the trees, the sound of it crashing through the underbrush echoing loudly. The men shouted, their flashlights swinging in the direction of the noise. "Go!" Sam whispered. Eleanor took off, her footsteps barely making a sound as she disappeared into the darkness. Sam waited until she was out of sight before throwing another rock, drawing the men farther away. When he was sure they had taken the bait, he grabbed Amanda's hand and pulled her to her feet. "Let's go." They moved quickly, slipping through the trees like shadows. Sam's lungs burned, and his legs ached, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not until they were safe. After what felt like an eternity, they finally emerged on the other side of the forest, the lights of a small farmhouse glowing in the distance. Sam slowed to a stop, his chest heaving as he turned to Amanda. "We made it," he said, his voice hoarse. Amanda nodded, leaning against him for support. "Where's Eleanor?" Before Sam could answer, the bushes rustled and Eleanor stepped out, her face flushed but triumphant. "We did it," she said, a small smile breaking through her exhaustion. Sam knelt in front of her, pulling her into a tight hug. Yeah, we did. But even as relief washed over him, he knew this was only the beginning. They had escaped for now, but Healer Tech wouldn't stop hunting them. And the next time, they might not be so lucky. The small farmhouse wasn't much. A weathered building with peeling white paint, a sagging porch, and a chimney that coughed faint wisps of smoke into the night sky. But at this moment, it felt like a sanctuary. Sam led Amanda and Eleanor toward it, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path. As they approached the front door, a single light flickered in the window, casting shadows across the front yard. Sam hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorframe. "Let me go first," he said, glancing at Amanda. She leaned against Eleanor, her ankle still throbbing from their sprint through the forest. "Be careful," Amanda said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam nodded and knocked lightly. He waited, the cold air biting at his skin as silence stretched between them. For a moment he thought the house might be empty, abandoned like so many others in the rural outskirts of Westboro. But then, the sound of shuffling footsteps grew louder from inside, and the door creaked open. An older man with silver hair and a wiry frame stood in the doorway, his eyes narrowing as he studied Sam. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans that looked as worn as the house itself. "Who the hell are you?" the man demanded, his voice gruff but cautious. "We're not here to cause trouble," Sam said quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "We just need a place to rest. It's an emergency." The man's gaze shifted to Amanda and Eleanor standing behind Sam. His expression softened slightly when he saw the child, but the suspicion in his eyes didn't fade completely. "You on the run from someone?" "Yes," Sam admitted, "but we're not criminals. I promise." The man sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Figures. People don't show up out here unless they're running from something." He stepped aside and gestured for them to come in. "But if you bring trouble to my doorstep, I'm throwing you all back out." "Understood," Sam said, ushering Amanda and Eleanor inside. The warmth of the house was a welcome contrast to the chilly night air. The living room was cozy, with a worn couch, brick fireplace, and bookshelves crammed with old paperbacks and framed photos. The scent of wood smoke and coffee lingered in the air, making the place feel strangely familiar, like stepping into a memory. "I'm Walter," the man said, closing the door behind them. "You hungry?" Amanda shook her head, still wincing as she eased onto the couch. "Just water, if you have any." Walter nodded and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Sam and Eleanor standing by the fireplace. Sam rubbed his hands together, trying to shake off the cold that had settled into his bones. Eleanor tugged on his sleeve, her voice barely audible. "Do you think we'll be safe here?" "For a little while," Sam said, though he couldn't ignore the knot of unease tightening in his gut. "But we can't stay long. Once they figure out we've gone off the main road, they'll come looking." Eleanor nodded, her eyes reflecting the flicker of the fire. "I don't want anyone else to get hurt because of me." Sam crouched down in front of her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "This isn't your fault, Eleanor. You didn't ask for any of this." "But they're after me," she said, her voice cracking. "If you and Amanda get hurt trying to protect me, we won't," Sam interrupted gently. "We've made it this far, and we're going to see this through. You're not alone, okay?" Her lower lip trembled, but she nodded, blinking back tears. Walter returned with a glass of water and a first aid kit, setting them on the coffee table. "You can stay the night," he said. "But in the morning, you need to be gone." "Thank you," Amanda said, taking a sip of the water. Walter leaned against the doorway, crossing his arms over his chest. "Mind telling me who you're running from?" Sam exchanged a glance with Amanda before answering. "A pharmaceutical company called Healer Tech. They're dangerous, and they'll do anything to protect their secrets." Walter let out a low whistle. "Healer Tech, huh? Heard of them. Big, powerful. If they're after you, you're in deep trouble." "We know," Amanda muttered, adjusting the makeshift bandage on her ankle. Walter studied them for a moment, then nodded toward the fireplace. "There's a trap door under the rug, leads to a cellar. If you need to hide, that's your best bet." "Why do you have a hiding spot?" Sam asked, raising an eyebrow. Walter chuckled dryly. "Let's just say, you're not the first people to show up here with trouble on their heels." Later that night, after Eleanor had fallen asleep on the couch and Amanda dozed off in the armchair, Sam sat by the fire, staring into the dancing flame. The warmth should have been comforting, but his mind wouldn't stop. Racing. He kept thinking about the data Eleanor had downloaded. The names, the locations, the experiments. It was the kind of evidence that could bring healer tech crashing down, but only if they found the right person to share it with. His thoughts were interrupted when Walter returned from the kitchen, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to Sam and took a seat in the armchair across from him. "You've got that look," Walter said, sipping his coffee. "What look?" "The one that says you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." Sam chuckled softly, but it lacked any real humor. "Feels like it." They sat in silence for a moment, the crackle of the fire filling the room. "Who's the girl?" Walter asked, glancing at Eleanor's sleeping form. "Her name's Eleanor," Sam said, his voice softening. "She's the key to everything. They experimented on her, implanted false memories. She remembers things that never happened, and they were using her to test new drugs. We have proof of everything they did. But getting it to the right people is the hard part." Walter nodded slowly. "You're risking a lot for her." "I owe it to her," Sam said. "I didn't protect my brother when he needed me, and it cost him his life. I'm not going to let that happen again." Walter studied him for a moment before leaning back in his chair. "You've got guts, kid. I'll give you that. But you're going up against people with money, power, and no morals. You sure you're ready for that?" Sam stared into the fire, the flickering flames reflecting in his eyes. "I don't have a choice." Walter sighed and stood, stretching his back. "Get some rest. You're going to need it." As Walter disappeared down the hallway, Sam leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. But sleep didn't come easily. His mind was filled with images of his brother, of Eleanor, and of the men chasing them. He knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but he couldn't let fear stop him. Tomorrow, they'd find his contact, and then they'd expose healer tech for what it truly was, no matter the cost. But for now, in the glow of the fire and the quiet hum of the night, Sam allowed himself a moment of peace. Just one moment. Morning broke slowly over the farmhouse, the first rays of sunlight peeking through the cracks in the old wooden shutters. The house was quiet, save for the distant sound of birds chirping outside and the occasional creak of the floorboards as they expanded in the warming air. Sam stirred awake in the armchair, his neck stiff from the awkward position. He blinked against the soft light filtering into the room and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. Eleanor was still asleep on the couch, her small body curled into a tight ball, clutching the edge of the blanket Walter had given her. Amanda, on the other hand, was wide awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a fresh cup of coffee steaming in front of her. Sam stretched and walked over, pulling out the chair across from her. "Couldn't sleep?" Amanda shook her head, her eyes glued to the screen. "Too much on my mind." She glanced up at him, her gaze softening. "You look like you barely slept either." "I didn't," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "What are you working on?" "I'm going through the files Eleanor downloaded," Amanda said, scrolling through a long list of documents. "There's enough here to blow." The entire operation wide open. Internal memos, research logs, trial results, it's all here. Sam leaned over to look at the screen. One document caught his eye, titled Subject Delta, Memory Projection Trials, Eleanor Foster. His stomach churned as Amanda opened it. The file contained detailed notes on the experiments they had conducted on Eleanor, complete with timestamps, medical observations, and horrifying descriptions of the artificial memories they had implanted. Subject experienced severe emotional distress following the implantation of a fabricated trauma involving the loss of a sibling. Monitored reactions included crying, withdrawal, and elevated heart rate. Sam clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. The words felt like a punch to the gut. "They put her through this on purpose," he said, his voice low and filled with anger. "Just to see how she'd react." Amanda nodded grimly. "And she wasn't the only one. There are dozens of other names listed. Orphans, kids from foster homes, all of them used as test subjects." Sam leaned back in his chair, struggling to steady his breathing. He thought of his brother, lying in a hospital bed after being unknowingly exposed to one of Healer Tech's experimental drugs, The same rage that had driven him to take this case was now threatening to consume him all over again. Amanda reached across the table and placed a hand on his arm. "We'll make them pay, Sam. But we have to be smart about it." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "We need to get this information to someone who can take action. I'm thinking of reaching out to James Dwyer." Amanda's eyes widened. "Dwyer? As in the investigative journalist who brought down that corrupt senator a few years back?" "Yeah," Sam said. I worked with case before. He has connections in the media and isn't afraid to go after powerful people. If anyone can help us, it's him." "But will he trust you?" Amanda asked, raising an eyebrow. "You haven't exactly been in the best shape lately." Sam exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. She wasn't wrong. His career had taken a nosedive after his brother's death, and his reputation had suffered along with it. But this time was different. This time, he had the truth on his side. "I'll convince him," Sam said. "I have to." After a quick breakfast, they packed up their things and prepared to leave the farmhouse. Eleanor helped Amanda into the truck, her small hands surprisingly steady as she adjusted the bandage around Amanda's ankle. Walter stood on the porch, leaning against the railing with a cigarette between his fingers. "Good luck, kid," he said to Sam as they loaded the last of their supplies into the truck. "You're gonna need it." Sam nodded, grateful for the man's hospitality. "Thanks for everything, Walter. I won't forget it." Walter waved them off, the smoke from his cigarette curling into the morning air as they pulled out of the driveway and headed back toward the main road. The drive to the city was tense, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on them like a heavy fog. Amanda rested her head against the window, her fingers tapping absently against her knee as she stared at the passing scenery. Eleanor sat quietly in the back, her gaze fixed on the laptop in her lap as she reviewed the files one last time. Sam kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was miles ahead, already imagining the conversation he would have with James Dwyer. Would Dwyer believe him? Would he agree to publish the story and risk the wrath of a corporation as powerful as Healer Tech? He couldn't afford to think about failure. Not now. As they entered the outskirts of the city, Sam pulled into a parking lot behind an old office building. He turned off the engine and took a deep breath, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. "I'll go in alone," he said, turning to Amanda and Eleanor. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Amanda asked, her brow furrowing with concern. "It's safer this way," Sam said. "If something goes wrong, I don't want you two getting caught in the middle of it." Amanda hesitated, but eventually nodded. "Just be careful." "I will," Sam promised. He grabbed a manila folder containing copies of the most damning documents and slipped out of the truck. The office was on the second floor of a nondescript building, tucked away between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The fluorescent lights in the hallway buzzed softly, casting a sterile glow over the cracked linoleum floor. Sam found the door marked Dwyer Investigations and knocked twice. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing James Dwyer himself, a middle-aged man with salt-and-pepper hair, sharp eyes, and a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. He looked Sam up and down, his expression guarded but curious. "Sam Kane," Dwyer said, leaning against the doorframe. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again." "I didn't think I'd be back," Sam admitted, "but I have something you need to see." Dwyer studied him for a moment before stepping aside. "Come in." Sam entered the small office, which was cluttered with stacks of papers, coffee-stained mugs, and a corkboard covered in newspaper clippings and photos connected by red string. The air smelled faintly of ink and stale coffee, a familiar scent that brought back memories of late nights spent chasing leads. Dwyer gestured for him to sit. "You look like hell, Sam." "I've had better days," Sam replied, placing the manila folder on the desk. "But this isn't about me. It's about Healer Tech." Dwyer raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything as he opened the folder and began flipping through the documents. As he read, his expression shifted from curiosity to shock, and finally to something darker, something close to anger. "Jesus," Dwyer muttered, closing the folder and leaning back in his chair. "This is huge. If half of this is true, Healer Tech is finished." "It's all true," Sam said firmly. "And there's more where that came from. We have digital files, names, everything. We just need someone brave enough to publish it." Dwyer tapped his fingers against the edge of the desk, deep in thought. You know what you're asking, right? If I publish this, Healer Tech will come after me. They'll sue, threaten, do whatever it takes to bury the story. I know, Sam said, but you've never backed down from a fight before. Dwyer smirked. No, I haven't. He leaned forward, meeting Sam's gaze. I'll do it, but I need time to verify everything. I can't run this story without solid proof. You'll have it, Sam promised. Just tell me what you need, Dwyer nodded. Give me a few days. I'll reach out when I'm ready. Sam stood and extended his hand. Thank you, James. Dwyer shook his hand firmly. Don't thank me yet. If we pull this off, it's going to be messy. Sam smiled faintly. I'm used to messy. As he left the office and made his way back to the truck, a strange sense of calm settled over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt like they were finally one step ahead. But deep down, he knew the storm wasn't over yet. It was only just beginning. Sam gripped the steering wheel, the cold leather biting into his palms as he navigated through the crowded city streets. The calm he'd felt leaving Dwyer's office had quickly evaporated, replaced by the gnawing tension of what could go wrong. They had the evidence. They had someone willing to expose the truth. But it still wasn't enough to shake the feeling that Healer Tech was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. Beside him, Amanda leaned her head back against the seat, her ankles still elevated on a rolled-up jacket. Did Dwyer take the bait? She asked, her voice weary but hopeful. Sam nodded. He's in, but he needs a few days to verify everything. Amanda exhaled, closing her eyes. Good. At least that's one thing going right. In the back seat, Eleanor was hunched over the laptop, scrolling through the files again. Her lips moved silently as she skimmed through the data, absorbing every detail like a sponge. Sam had to remind himself that she wasn't an ordinary 10-year-old. Her mind worked in ways he couldn't fully understand, and he could see the gears turning behind her sharp eyes. Do you think we'll be safe until then? Eleanor asked without looking up. Sam didn't answer right away. He couldn't lie to her. We're safer than we were, he said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. But Healer Tech won't stop until they're sure we're gone. Eleanor's fingers stilled on the keyboard. Then we can't let them find us. The tension in the truck eased slightly as they left the city limits and drove deeper into the countryside, where the fields stretched wide and the air smelled like wet grass and freshly turned soil. Amanda drifted off to sleep, her breathing steady, while Eleanor remained silent, lost in her thoughts. Sam kept driving until they reached a small roadside diner nestled between two oak trees. Its neon sign flickered weakly, advertising best pie in town. The place looked old, but welcoming, a beacon of normalcy in their chaotic world. Sam pulled into the gravel lot and parked near the back, where the truck wouldn't be visible from the road. Let's take a break, he said, cutting the engine. Amanda stirred awake, blinking against the sunlight. Where are we? Just a diner, Sam said. We'll grab some food and figure out our next move. They stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling as they entered. The smell of fried bacon and warm cinnamon hit them immediately, and for a moment, Sam let himself relax. The place was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered at the booths. An elderly waitress with a kind face smiled as they took a seat near the window. What can I get you folks? She asked, her notepad at the ready. 3 coffees and whatever pie you recommend, Sam said, glancing at Amanda and Eleanor, who both nodded in agreement. As the waitress walked away, Amanda leaned across the table, lowering her voice. We should probably change vehicles. They'll be looking for the truck by now. Sam nodded. I was thinking the same thing. There's a bus station a few miles from here. We can ditch the truck and catch a ride to another town. Eleanor set the laptop on the table, her fingers tapping nervously against its surface. How will Dwyer find us if we're constantly moving? I'll stay in contact with him, Sam assured her. We'll find a way to make this work. The waitress returned with their coffees and slices of apple pie, placing them gently on the table. Let me know if you need anything else, she said with a smile before walking away. Sam took a sip of his coffee, the warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to enjoy a simple moment. A bite of pie, the hum of conversation in the background, the feel of Eleanor sitting safely across from him. But the moment didn't last. Amanda's phone buzzed on the table, breaking the fragile peace. She picked it up and frowned, her eyes narrowing as she read the message. "It's from Dwyer," she said, sliding the phone across the table to Sam. The message was short, but chilling. "They know. Get out. Now." Sam's blood ran cold. "Damn it," he muttered, shoving the phone into his pocket. He scanned the diner, his eyes landing on a man sitting alone near the counter, nursing a cup of coffee. His posture was too stiff, too alert, and the way his eyes flicked toward them when he thought they weren't looking confirmed Sam's suspicion. "We've been made," he said quietly, his pulse pounding. His pulse in his ears. "We need to leave. Now." Eleanor's face paled, but she didn't panic. She closed the laptop and slipped it into her backpack, her movements quick and precise. Amanda grabbed her cane, gritting her teeth as she stood. Sam threw a few bills on the table and led them toward the exit, keeping his pace casual to avoid drawing attention. As soon as they stepped outside, the urgency kicked in. "Head for the truck," Sam said, glancing over his shoulder. The man from the diner was following them, his pace quickening. They barely made it to the truck before Sam heard the sound of a gun being cocked. "Get in!" he shouted, throwing open the driver's side door and jumping inside. Amanda and Eleanor scrambled into the truck just as the man raised his gun. Sam floored the gas pedal, the tires screeching against the gravel as they sped out of the lot. A shot rang out, shattering the rear windshield. Glass rained down on them, but no one was hurt. "Hold on!" Sam shouted, swerving onto the main road and accelerating as fast as the truck could handle. Eleanor ducked down, clutching her backpack against her chest. Amanda twisted in her seat, watching the road behind them. "They're following us!" she yelled. Sam glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a black sedan gaining on them. His mind raced, calculating their options. The highway stretched ahead, straight and open, offering little in the way of cover. They couldn't outrun the sedan for long. "We need to lose them," Amanda said, her voice sharp with urgency. Sam spotted a dirt road branching off to the right and made a split-second decision. He yanked the wheel, the truck skidding as they veered off the highway and onto the bumpy path. The trees closed in around them, their branches casting shadows that danced across the windshield. The sedan followed, its tires kicking up a cloud of dust. Sam pushed the truck harder, the engine groaning in protest as they navigated the uneven terrain. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, sweat dripping down his temples. "There!" Eleanor pointed to a narrow trail, leading deeper into the forest. Sam didn't hesitate. He turned sharply, the truck bouncing over rocks and roots as they barreled down the path. The trees grew denser, their thick trunks forming a natural barrier that made it difficult for the sedan to keep up. "Come on," Sam muttered under his breath, willing the truck to hold together. The sedan swerved, its driver struggling to maintain control on the uneven ground. Sam saw his chance and took it. He veered sharply to the left, cutting through a gap between the trees. The sedan tried to follow but clipped a tree trunk, spinning out of control before crashing into a ditch. Sam didn't stop to check the damage. He kept driving until the forest thinned and a narrow road appeared ahead. He turned onto it and slowed down, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the adrenaline slowly ebbed away. In the back seat, Eleanor sat up, her face flushed but determined. "We did it." Amanda exhaled shakily, leaning her head against the window. "Barely." Sam pulled over to the side of the road and cut the engine, letting the silence settle around them. His hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, the weight of what had just happened, crashing down on him. "That was too close," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Amanda placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "We're still alive. That's what matters." Sam nodded, forcing himself to breathe. "We need a new vehicle, and fast." Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze steady. "What do we do now?" Sam looked out at the endless road ahead, knowing they couldn't stop moving, not until the truth was exposed. "We keep running," he said. "But next time, we'll be ready." The truck creaked as it crawled down the narrow back road, its once powerful engine reduced to a sputtering growl. Sam could feel every bump and dip in the road beneath them, the suspension groaning in protest. They were deep in the countryside now, surrounded by fields that stretched endlessly on. Either side, interrupted only by the occasional wooden fence or weathered barn. Amanda leaned against the window, her face pale and tired. Her ankle was swollen again, and despite her best efforts to hide it, Sam could see the pain etched in her features. In the back seat, Eleanor sat cross-legged, the laptop resting on her knees as she reviewed the files for what felt like the 100th time. Her fingers moved across the touchpad with mechanical precision, but her eyes were glassy, the exhaustion creeping in. They couldn't keep this up. Sam knew it, and judging by the silence in the truck, so did Amanda and Eleanor. "We need to stop," he said finally, breaking the quiet. Amanda didn't argue. She simply nodded, closing her eyes as if the thought of stopping was the only thing keeping her upright. "If we don't find a place soon, this truck's going to give out before we—" Sam glanced at the fuel gauge, the needle hovering dangerously close to empty. "I passed a sign a few miles back," he said. "There's a small town up ahead. We can ditch the truck there and find something else." "Think we'll blend in?" Amanda asked, raising an eyebrow. Sam chuckled softly. "As long as we don't park this rust bucket in front of the police station, we should be fine." Eleanor didn't lift her gaze from the screen, but she spoke softly. "What if they're already looking for us there?" "They probably are," Sam admitted. "But we don't have a choice. We can't outrun them in this thing." The town of Fairfield appeared on the horizon like a painting brought to life. It was small, with red brick storefronts and a single traffic light that blinked lazily over the main street. The air smelled of freshly baked bread and wood smoke, the kind of place where neighbors greeted each other by name and news traveled faster than the speed limit. Sam parked the truck behind an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of town, the gravel crunching under the tires as they rolled to a stop. He killed the engine, and for a moment, the silence was deafening. Amanda let out a long breath and opened the door, swinging her legs out carefully. "Finally," she muttered, wincing as her foot hit the ground. "I thought we were going to rattle apart before we made it." Eleanor climbed out after her, stretching her arms above her head. "What's the plan now?" Sam scanned the area, his gaze settling on a used car lot across the street. "We need a new vehicle, something low profile that won't draw attention." "You planning to steal it?" Amanda asked, arching an eyebrow. "Only if I have to," Sam replied. "But let's try talking to the owner first. Maybe they'll cut us a deal." Amanda smirked. "You always did have a way with words." Sam grinned back. But the truth was, he wasn't feeling particularly lucky. The events of the last few days had worn him down, and he could feel the weight of it pressing against his chest. But he had to keep going. For Eleanor, for Amanda, and for the brother he had lost. "Stay here," he told them. "I'll check it out." The used car lot was small, with a mix of older sedans and trucks parked haphazardly across the gravel lot. A hand-painted sign above the office door read, "Fairfield Auto, honest deals, honest wheels." Sam approached the building, the bell above the door, jingling as he stepped inside. The office smelled of motor oil and stale coffee. Behind the counter, a man in his 60s with a potbelly and a salt and pepper beard looked up from his newspaper. His name tag read, "Bill." "Morning," Bill said, setting the paper aside. "Looking for a car?" "Something cheap and reliable," Sam replied, leaning against the counter. "We're on a road trip, and our truck didn't make it this far." Bill chuckled. "That old thing parked across the street yours? No wonder you need a new ride." Sam forced a laugh, his mind already racing. "Yeah, she's a beauty, but not built for long distances." "Well, you're in luck," Bill said, standing and gesturing toward the lot outside. "Got a few older models that'll get you where you're going without breaking the bank. Follow me." Sam followed him outside, his gaze sweeping the lot as he mentally cataloged the vehicles. There was a beat-up station wagon, an old Ford pickup, and a silver sedan that looked like it hadn't seen a car wash in years. Sam pointed to the sedan. "How much for that one?" $2,000, Bill said, folding his arms over his chest. Sam grimaced. "I can give you $1,500 in cash. Take it or leave it." Bill scratched his beard, eyeing Sam with suspicion. $1,500, huh? You in some kind of hurry?" Sam forced a casual shrug. "Just trying to get to the next town before sunset." Bill considered him for a moment before nodding. "All right. You've got yourself a deal. But I'm throwing in a free piece of advice. Get that sedan to a mechanic as soon as you can. She's reliable, but she's got a few quirks. Don't we all? Sam said, handing over the cash. Bill laughed and handed him the keys. Safe travels, friend. Back at the gas station, Amanda and Eleanor were waiting near the truck. Eleanor's backpack was slung over her shoulder, and Amanda leaned against the hood, her eyes scanning the road. New ride secured, Sam said, tossing the keys to Amanda. It's not pretty, but it'll get us out of here. Amanda caught the keys with a smirk. You sure you didn't steal it? Nope, Sam replied. But we're not sticking around to give Bill time to change his mind. They quickly transferred their belongings to the sedan and ditched the truck behind the gas station. As Sam pulled onto the road, he couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see black SUVs tailing them. But the road behind them was empty. For now. They drove for another hour, the farmland gradually giving way to rolling hills and thick forests. The late afternoon sun bathed the landscape in golden light, casting long shadows across the road. Eleanor sat quietly in the back seat, her head resting against the window as she watched the trees blur past. Amanda shifted in her seat, wincing slightly as she adjusted her leg. Where are we headed now? North, Sam said. There's a safe house in a small town called Ridgeway. I used it once during an investigation. It's off the grid, and should give us time to regroup while Dwyer finishes his verification. Amanda nodded, her gaze softening. Do you think he'll come through for us? He will, Sam said, though a flicker of doubt tugged at the edge of his thoughts. He's not the kind of guy who backs down once he's committed. Silence settled over them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came after shared hardship, a quiet understanding that words weren't always necessary. As they drove deeper into the forest, the air grew cooler, and the trees formed a canopy overhead, casting dappled shadows on the road. For a moment, it felt like they had escaped the chaos, like they were just a group of travelers on a scenic drive. But Sam knew better. The reprieve wouldn't last. Healer Tech wasn't done with them yet. The sedan rattled along the winding forest road, the dense canopy above filtering the fading light into patches of gold and shadow. Sam could hear the rhythmic hum of the tires beneath them, and the occasional groan of the engine. But otherwise, the world felt eerily silent, the kind of silence that weighed on your chest, thick with the sense that something was lurking just out of sight. Eleanor had fallen asleep in the back seat, her small frame curled against the door, her head resting on the backpack that held the evidence. The soft rise and fall of her breath was the only thing keeping Sam grounded. Beside him, Amanda sat with her arms crossed, staring out the window, her fingers tapping lightly against her arm in a nervous rhythm. You're thinking, Sam said, breaking the silence. What's on your mind? Amanda sighed and glanced at him. Just wondering how long we can keep running. Before our luck runs out. Sam tightened his grip on the steering wheel. I don't believe in luck. Amanda smirked, but it didn't reach her eyes. That explains a lot. They drove in silence for another few miles until the forest thinned, revealing a small clearing where an old cabin stood. It was tucked away behind a row of pine trees, the wood weathered and gray, but the roof looked intact and smoke still curled faintly from the chimney. Sam pulled the car up to the side of the cabin, cutting the engine as he surveyed the area. This is the place, he said, turning to Amanda. It's not much, but it's safe. Amanda glanced at the cabin, her expression skeptical. Safe how? It looks like it's about to fall apart. That's the point, Sam replied, stepping out of the car. No one would think to look for us here. Eleanor stirred awake as Sam opened the back door. She blinked, sleepily, rubbing her eyes as she took in their surroundings. Where are we? Ridgeway, Sam said, helping her out of the car. This is where we're going to lay low for a bit. Eleanor nodded, still groggy, and followed Amanda toward the cabin while Sam grabbed their bags. The air smelled of damp, wood and pine, the kind of smell that reminded him of childhood camping trips with his brother. A memory flashed through his mind. His brother's laugh, the crackle of a campfire, the way the stars had seemed so close back then. He shook the thought away. This wasn't the time for nostalgia. The wooden porch creaked under their weight as they stepped inside. The interior was small but cozy, with a stone fireplace against one wall and a worn couch sitting in the middle of the room. Dust covered the surfaces, and cobwebs clung to the corners. But the cabin was dry, and that was all that mattered. I'll check the perimeter, Sam said, setting the bags down. Make sure no one followed us. Amanda nodded. Be quick. We need to talk about what's next. Sam stepped outside, the cool evening air wrapping around him like a blanket. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in shades of blue and gray. He circled the cabin, his eyes scanning the tree line for any signs of movement. The crunch of leaves under his boots was the only sound. But that didn't put him at ease. He had learned long ago that silence wasn't always a good thing. He checked the road leading up to the cabin, making sure no tire tracks or footprints betrayed their location. Satisfied, he made his way back inside, locking the door behind him. Amanda had already made herself comfortable on the couch, her leg propped up on a stack of blankets. Eleanor sat cross-legged on the floor, the laptop open in front of her as she scrolled through the files once again. Sam sat down across from them, rubbing his hands together to shake off the lingering chill. Perimeter's clear. No signs of anyone following us. For now, Amanda said. But that could change. I know, Sam replied, leaning. We need to decide our next move. Dwyer's working on verifying the evidence, but it could be days before he's ready to go public. Until then, we're sitting ducks. Amanda tapped her fingers against her leg, her mind clearly racing. We need to stay ahead of Healer Tech. We can't afford to wait for them to find us again. Sam ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. If we go on the offensive, we risk exposing ourselves. But if we stay here too long, they'll track us down. Eleanor's soft voice interrupted them. What if we set a trap for them? Both Sam and Amanda turned. To her, surprised. Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. They're already looking for us, right? If we give them a reason to think they've found us, we can control the situation. Sam leaned back, considering her words. You're talking about baiting them. Eleanor nodded. We could send a message using the files. Something that makes them think we're planning to meet someone with the evidence. They'll come after us, but we'll be waiting for them. Amanda shook her head, her brow furrowed. That's risky. What if it backfires? We'll be ready, Sam said, the gears in his mind already turning. If we pick the right spot, we can lead them into a trap and neutralize the immediate threat. It won't get rid of Healer Tech entirely, but it'll buy us time. Amanda exhaled sharply, her fingers drumming faster against her knee. Okay, where do we do it? There's an abandoned logging site about 5 miles. From here, Sam said. It's remote, with plenty of places to hide. We can set up there and control the environment. And how do we lure them in? Amanda asked. Sam glanced at Eleanor. We'll need you for that. Eleanor straightened, her shoulders square despite the fear flickering in her eyes. What do I have to do? We'll send a message from your laptop, Sam said. It'll look like we're meeting someone to hand off the files. They'll think they're intercepting us, but we'll be ready. Eleanor hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. What if they don't take the bait? I will, Sam said, his voice steady. They've come too far to back off now. Eleanor nodded, determination hardening her features. She began typing, her fingers moving with the speed and precision of someone who had spent their life solving puzzles. Within minutes, she had crafted a message that would make any Healer Tech operative salivate. Meet confirmed. 9 p.m. tonight at the Ridgeway logging site. Bring the files. Amanda read the message over Eleanor's shoulder and let out a low whistle. That should do it. Sam pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the message, then used a burner email account to send it to a contact he knew would leak it to the right people. It's done, he said. Now we wait. By the time the sun set completely, casting the forest in darkness, Sam had set up their defenses at the logging site. The abandoned machinery and piles of timber provided plenty of cover, and he had chosen a spot overlooking the clearing where they could see anyone approaching. Amanda sat behind a stack of logs, her legs stretched out in front of her, a makeshift splint wrapped around her ankle. She held a flashlight in one hand and a flare gun in the other, ready to signal if things went south. Eleanor sat beside Sam, her backpack clutched tightly against her chest. Are you scared? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, Sam admitted. But being scared isn't always a bad thing. It keeps you sharp. Eleanor nodded, her small hand slipping into his. I trust you. Sam's throat tightened, but he didn't let it show. He squeezed her hand gently. "We'll get through this." The distant sound of tires crunching against gravel snapped them both to attention. Sam peered through the darkness, his heart pounding as the beam of headlights cut through the trees. "They're here," he whispered. Eleanor's grip tightened on his hand, but she didn't make a sound. The hunters had arrived. Now, it was time to turn the tables. The low rumble of the approaching vehicle grew louder, cutting through the thick silence of the night like a warning drum. Sam's pulse thumped in sync with the sound, but his breathing remained steady. His eyes never left the clearing ahead, where the old logging equipment sat like forgotten relics of a bygone era. The headlights bounced along the uneven ground as the vehicle came into view. A sleek black SUV. "They fell for it," Amanda whispered from her position behind the pile of timber. She held the flare gun tightly in her hand, her knuckles white. "Now we just have to survive this." Sam nodded, signaling for Eleanor to stay low. "Whatever happens, don't move until I tell you. Understand?" Eleanor's wide eyes met his, her fear barely contained. But she nodded. "I understand." The SUV rolled to a stop in the center of the clearing, its headlights cutting off, plunging the area back into shadow. The doors opened in near unison, and 3 men stepped out, their silhouettes dark against the faint glow of the moon. They moved with purpose, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel, the sound eerily calm for men who had come to kill. Sam recognized one of them immediately, Mark Holloway, the head of HealerTech's operations. Holloway was a tall man with a lean build and a cold, calculating gaze that could freeze you where you stood. His tailored suit was out of place in the rugged surroundings, but the way he carried himself made it clear he didn't care. He wasn't here to blend in. He was here to clean up loose ends. "Spread out," Holloway ordered, his voice low but commanding. The 2 men flanking him nodded and fanned out, their eyes scanning the shadows. One of them carried a flashlight, its beam sweeping across the old logging equipment and piles of timber. Sam's breath hitched as the light passed dangerously close to Amanda's hiding spot. She pressed herself flat against the logs, her body tense but still. The light moved on, and Sam exhaled silently. "They're expecting someone to meet us here," Holloway said, his voice carrying through the clearing. "Stay alert. This could be a trap." Sam smirked to himself. "It is." He glanced at Eleanor, who was huddled beside him, her small hands gripping the straps of her backpack. "Stay here," he whispered. "I'm going to draw them away." "No," she whispered back, her voice shaking. "It's too dangerous." "I'll be fine," Sam promised. "You just have to trust me." Eleanor's lips trembled, but she nodded. "Be careful." Sam slipped away from their hiding spot, moving silently through the shadows. His heartbeat was a drum in his ears, but he pushed the fear aside, focusing on each step, each breath. He circled around the clearing, keeping low as he positioned himself behind one of the large piles of timber. He picked up a rock from the ground and hurled it toward the far end of the site. The rock clattered against a rusted piece of machinery, the noise echoing through the clearing like a gunshot. "Over." "There!" one of the men shouted, his flashlight beam darting toward the noise. Holloway gestured for the others to follow. "Check it out." As the men moved toward the sound, Sam slipped behind them, closing the distance between himself and Holloway. His pocket knife felt cold and familiar in his hand. But he knew he couldn't rely on brute force alone. He needed to outthink them. From her hiding spot, Amanda watched as the men disappeared into the darkness, her fingers tightening around the flare gun. "Come on, Sam," she whispered to herself. "Don't get caught." Near the edge of the clearing, one of the men scanned the area with his flashlight, the beam casting long, shifting shadows across the ground. "I don't see anything," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "Keep looking," the other man replied. "They're here somewhere." Sam crouched behind a large stack of timber, his breath steady as he watched them from the shadows. He needed to take them out quietly, one by one, before they could regroup. He waited until the man with the flashlight turned his back, then sprang forward, wrapping his arm around the man's neck and pulling him down. The man struggled, but Sam tightened, his grip cutting off his air until his body went limp. Sam lowered him gently to the ground and grabbed the man's flashlight, turning it off before slipping back into the shadows. 1 down, 2 to go. He crept toward the second man, who was still scanning the area, unaware that his partner had been taken out. Sam moved quickly, closing the distance and slamming the butt of the flashlight against the back of the man's head. The man crumpled to the ground without a sound. Sam didn't waste time. He grabbed the man's earpiece and radio, switching it off to prevent any communication with Holloway. He turned his attention back to the clearing, where Holloway stood alone near the his phone pressed to his ear. "They're not here," Holloway said, his tone irritated. "It's a decoy. I want a search team in the area immediately. They couldn't have gone far." Sam's fingers tightened around the flashlight. He couldn't let Holloway call for backup. He moved swiftly, closing the distance between them before Holloway could react. Sam grabbed him from behind, twisting the phone out of his hand and slamming him against the side of the SUV. Holloway grunted in pain but didn't panic. Instead, he laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Kane," he said, spitting blood onto the ground. "I figured you'd show up eventually." Sam pressed the knife against Holloway's neck, his jaw clenched. "Call off your men, now." "Or what?" Holloway smirked. "You're not a killer, Kane. You don't have the guts." Sam's grip tightened, but he didn't move the knife. Holloway was right. He wasn't a killer, but he was desperate. "Try me," Sam growled. Holloway's eyes narrowed, but he didn't call Sam's bluff. He raised his hands slowly. "Fine. You win this round." From her hiding spot, Amanda watched the standoff, her fingers hovering over the trigger of the flare gun. She could see the tension in Sam's posture, the way his shoulders were rigid and his knuckles white around the knife. He was on the edge, teetering between restraint and something darker. "Sam," she called softly, her voice cutting through the tonight. "Don't do it." Sam's gaze flicked toward her, and in that brief moment, Holloway made his move. He twisted out of Sam's grip and delivered a hard elbow to his stomach, knocking the wind out of him. Sam stumbled back, gasping for air, as Holloway reached for the gun holstered at his side. Sudden burst of light filled the clearing as Amanda fired the flare gun, the fiery projectile soaring through the air and exploding like a miniature sun. The light blinded Holloway, and Sam used the momentary distraction to lunge forward, tackling him to the ground. The gun skidded across the dirt. Out of reach. Sam pinned Holloway down, his breath ragged. "It's over," he said through gritted teeth. "You're done." Holloway chuckled, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. "You think this ends with me? Healer tech is bigger than you can imagine. Even if you take me down, there'll be someone else to pick up where I left off." "Maybe," Sam said. "But you won't be around to see it." Eleanor appeared at Sam's side, her backpack clutched tightly against her chest. She stared down at Holloway, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "We have everything we need," she said softly. "We can expose them." Sam met her gaze and nodded. "Then let's finish this." With Holloway restrained and his men incapacitated, they had bought themselves a precious window of time. But Sam knew it wouldn't last. They needed to disappear again, before the storm closed in for good. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke from the flare, which still smoldered faintly in the dirt. Holloway lay pinned beneath Sam, his breaths labored and shallow. Amanda limped toward them, her face pale and determined despite the pain in her ankle. Eleanor stood close by, gripping her backpack like it was a shield. "We don't have much time," Amanda said, glancing over her shoulder toward the forest. The flare's light could have been seen for miles. Backup won't be far behind. Sam's heart was still pounding, the adrenaline of the fight keeping him on edge. His fingers twitched, still gripping the collar of Holloway's shirt. He wanted to end it here, to make sure the man who had orchestrated so much pain wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else. But Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. "We have everything we need." Killing Holloway wouldn't fix things. Exposing the truth would. Sam exhaled sharply and released his grip, standing up and shoving Holloway back into the dirt. "Stay down," he warned, his voice like steel. Holloway laughed, a bitter, wheezing sound. "You're making a mistake, Kane. Letting me live won't change anything. Healer tech will find you." "We'll see about that," Sam said. Amanda handed Sam a pair of plastic zip ties from her backpack. "Let's make sure he doesn't follow us." Sam nodded, binding Holloway's wrists and ankles with practiced precision. Holloway struggled briefly, but quickly realized it was futile. "You're in over your head," he spat. "You think this evidence will bring down a corporation like Healer Tech? They'll bury you before the story even hits the press. Eleanor stepped forward, her small frame casting a shadow over him. They won't be able to bury the truth this time. Sam was struck by the fierceness in her voice, the way her eyes burned with defiance. For a brief moment, he saw a glimpse of the woman she would become, brave, relentless, unshakable. Without another word, they left Holloway on the ground, his curses fading into the background as they made their way back to the car. The forest was alive with the sounds of insects and rustling leaves, but every snap of a branch made Sam's muscles tense. He kept expecting to hear the roar of engines, the bark of orders, the crack of gunfire. But the forest remained eerily quiet. "Come on," Sam urged, quickening his pace as the car came into view. The silver sedan was parked just where they had left it, partially hidden by the dense underbrush. Amanda limped ahead, wincing with every step, while Eleanor climbed into the back seat and quickly buckled herself in. Sam slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. It roared to life, the sound both reassuring and nerve-wracking. He gripped the steering wheel tightly as he navigated the narrow dirt road, the trees blurring past them in a dizzying rush of shadows. "We need a new plan," Amanda said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We can't keep running forever," his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "But right now, we need to disappear, completely." "Disappear where?" Eleanor asked from the back seat, her voice small but steady. Sam hesitated, his mind racing through possibilities. Every safe house he had ever known was compromised, and Dwyer's team would need more time to finalize their investigation. They couldn't risk contacting anyone just yet. Then, an idea struck him. "There's an abandoned cabin up north," he said. "It's off the grid. No phone lines, no internet. We can lay low there for a few days until we hear from Dwyer." Amanda frowned. "How? Do you know about this place?" "It belonged to a friend of my brother," Sam said, his voice softening. "We used to go there during the summers. No one knows about it except me." Amanda considered this for a moment before nodding. "If it's off the grid, it might buy us some time." Sam glanced at the gas gauge, which hovered just above empty. "We'll need to refuel before we hit the back roads. There's a small town about 20 miles from here. We'll stop there, but we need to be quick." The town of Greystone was smaller than Fairfield, with only a few main roads and a scattering of homes and shops. The gas station sat on the edge of town, its dimly lit sign flickering like a dying flame. Sam pulled the sedan up to one of the pumps and shut off the engine. "You two stay here," he said, reaching into his pocket for cash. "I'll be right back." Amanda leaned back in her seat, her eyes scanning the road ahead. "Be careful." Sam stepped out of the car, the cool night air biting at his skin as he approached the pump. He inserted the nozzle and began filling the tank, his eyes darting around the quiet street. The town felt deserted, but Sam knew better than to trust appearances, could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching them, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. As the tank filled, he caught movement in his peripheral vision. A man standing by the entrance of a nearby convenience store, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. The man was pretending to check his phone, but his posture was too rigid, too alert. Sam's pulse quickened. "They're here." He finished filling the tank and replaced the nozzle, his movements calm and controlled despite the panic rising in his chest. He walked back to the car, his hand resting casually near the pocket where he kept his knife. "Get ready to go," he said softly as he slid into the driver's seat. "We're being watched." Amanda sat up straight, her hand instinctively reaching for the flare gun tucked under the seat. Eleanor's eyes widened, but she remained silent, clutching the backpack tighter. Sam started the engine and pulled out of the gas station, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. He didn't speed. Doing so would only draw attention, but his grip on the wheel was tight enough to make his knuckles turn white. "They're following us," Amanda said, glancing out the back window. A black car had pulled out of the gas station and was keeping a steady distance behind them. Sam's mind raced. The road ahead was long and straight, with no turnoffs for miles. They couldn't outrun their pursuers, not on an open road, but there was a way to lose them. "There's an old service road up ahead," Sam said. "It's overgrown, but it leads to a riverbank. If we can reach it, we can hide the car and lose them on foot." "You sure about this?" Amanda asked. It's our best shot, Sam replied. He spotted the entrance to the service road, a narrow dirt path barely visible through the overgrown brush, and veered sharply. To the right. The car jolted as it hit the uneven terrain, but Sam kept going, the trees closing in around them like a tunnel. Behind them, the black car skidded to a stop at the entrance, its headlights sweeping across the trees. Sam didn't wait to see if they would follow. He drove until the path ended at the riverbank, where the moonlight reflected off the water in shimmering ripples. Out of the car, Sam said, grabbing the bags from the back seat. We're crossing the river. Eleanor hesitated for a moment before nodding, her small hand slipping into Sam's. Amanda limped after them, her determination outweighing the pain. The water was cold and fast, soaking their shoes and jeans as they waded across to the other side. The current tugged at them, but Sam kept a firm grip on Eleanor and Amanda, guiding them toward the opposite bank. When they finally reached the other side, they collapsed onto the ground, breathless and shivering. We did it, Eleanor whispered, her teeth chattering. Sam looked back across the river, the sound of distant voices and the glare of flashlights barely visible through the trees. Not yet, he said, helping them to their feet. But we will. The wind cut through the dense forest like a knife, whistling between the trees as Sam led Amanda and Eleanor farther from the riverbank. Their soaked clothes clung to their bodies, making every step feel heavier than the last. The mud squelched under their shoes and the smell of damp earth filled the air. But Sam kept moving, his instincts on high alert. The voices and flashlights from their pursuers had faded, but Sam knew better than to assume they were safe. Healer tech wouldn't give up easily, not when the evidence Eleanor carried could destroy them. Wait! Amanda panted, limping as she panted, limping. Grabbed onto a low-hanging branch for support. We need a break. Sam glanced around, his breath clouding in the cold night air. He didn't want to stop, but Amanda's ankle had taken a beating, and Eleanor was shivering violently, her small frame trembling as she hugged her backpack to her chest. Okay, he said, leading them to a large oak tree with thick roots that provided a bit of shelter. We'll rest here for a few minutes, but we can't stay long. Amanda sank down against the tree trunk, her head leaning back as she closed her eyes. Eleanor sat beside her, curling into a ball and tucking her knees under her chin. Sam knelt in front of them, pulling off his jacket and wrapping it around Eleanor's shoulders. You doing okay, kid? He asked softly. She nodded, but her lips were blue and her teeth chattered. I'm fine, she whispered, though her voice wavered. Sam reached into his backpack and pulled out a small emergency blanket. He draped it over both Eleanor and Amanda, tucking the edges tightly around them. The metallic fabric crinkled softly as it settled, offering a barrier against the chill. We'll keep moving soon, he promised, though the weight of everything pressing down on them made that promise feel hollow. Amanda opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his. Where exactly are we going, Sam? The cabin I told you about, he said. It's still about 10 miles from here, but once we're there, we'll have everything we need. Food, warmth, and a place to regroup. Until Dwyer gets back to us. Amanda sighed, running a hand through her damp hair. This is the most insane thing we've ever done. And the most important, Sam replied, his voice firm. We can't give up now. Before Amanda could respond, Eleanor's head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. Did you hear that? Sam stilled, his ears straining to catch the sound. At first there was nothing but the rustle of leaves in the wind and the distant hoot of an owl. But then he heard it. Twigs snapping underfoot, faint but deliberate. Someone was nearby. Get down, he whispered, motioning for them to stay behind the tree. He moved silently toward the noise, his breath steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. The forest was dark, the moonlight barely piercing the canopy above, but his eyes adjusted quickly. As he crept closer, he saw a figure moving through the trees, their footsteps. Cautious, but determined. Sam ducked behind a tree, waiting for the figure to pass. When they were close enough, he stepped out and pressed the edge of his pocket knife against their throat. Don't move, Sam growled. The figure froze, their breath hitching in surprise. But then the person spoke, and Sam's world tilted. Sam? Is that you? He recognized the voice instantly, gravelly, familiar, and laced with disbelief. Ethan. Sam's grip on the knife faltered as he stepped back, allowing the man to turn around. The moonlight filtered through the branches, casting a soft glow on his face. Ethan. Davis. Sam hadn't seen him in over 5 years, not since his brother's funeral. Ethan had been one of Sam's closest friends back then, practically family. But when Sam had spiraled into obsession, trying to uncover the truth about Healer Tech's experiments, Ethan had pulled away. "What the hell are you doing out here?" Sam asked, his mind racing. Ethan lowered his hands slowly, his expression a mix of confusion and relief. "I could ask you the same thing. I was tracking someone, thought they were poachers or hikers in trouble. Didn't expect to run into you." Sam's instinct screamed at him to stay on guard, but a part of him, the part that remembered late nights drinking beers and sharing secrets, wanted to trust Ethan. "We don't have time for this," Amanda said, emerging from behind the tree with Eleanor close behind. "Sam, who is this?" Sam glanced between Amanda and Ethan, his thoughts tangled. "He's an old friend. We can trust him." Amanda's brow furrowed, but she didn't argue. She turned her attention back to the forest, scanning the area for any signs of danger. "Then we need to move before someone else finds us." Ethan looked at the group, his gaze lingering on Eleanor and the backpack she clung to. "You're running from someone, aren't you?" he asked. "Yeah," Sam said. "And we could use your help." Ethan hesitated for a moment before nodding. "There's an old hunting cabin about a mile from here. It's not much, but it's safe." Sam's gut twisted at the idea of trusting anyone right now, but they didn't have many options. "Lead the way." The hunting cabin was small, with a single room and a wood-burning stove that crackled softly as Ethan stoked the fire. The walls were lined with hunting gear and old photographs of deer trophies, and the smell of smoke and pine filled the air. Amanda sat on a cot, her leg elevated on a pile of blankets, while Eleanor huddled near the fire, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Sam stood by the window, watching the forest for any signs of movement. His mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. He wanted to believe Ethan could be trusted, but the years of betrayal and loss had made him paranoid. Ethan handed Sam a cup of hot tea. "You're not going to tell me what this is about, are you?" "Not much to tell," Sam said, blowing on the tea before taking a sip. "We're in trouble. Healer Tech is after us." Ethan's eyes darkened. "Healer Tech? I thought you gave up on that." "I never did," Sam replied. "And now we have proof of what they've done. But they know we have it, and they'll do anything to stop us." Ethan leaned against the wall, rubbing his jaw thoughtfully. "I heard rumors about Healer Tech. People disappearing. Strange deaths. Is it all true?" Sam nodded. "Worse than you think." Ethan exhaled slowly. "If you need a place to hide, you can stay here. But if they're as dangerous as you say, you won't be safe for long." "We know," Amanda said from the cot. "We're just buying time until we can get this information to the press." Eleanor looked up, her voice small. "What if we can't?" Sam crouched beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We will," he said firmly. "No matter what it takes." Ethan watched the exchange, something shifting in his expression. "If you're serious about taking them down, you'll need more than just proof. You'll need allies." Sam looked at him, the weight of Ethan's words sinking in. "Are you offering to help?" Ethan smirked. "I wouldn't have built this fire if I wasn't." For the first time that night, Sam allowed himself to hope. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the walls of the cabin. The warm glow should have been comforting, but Sam couldn't shake the gnawing tension in his gut. He sat by the window, peering into the dark forest beyond, scanning for any movement that might signal Healer Tech's operatives closing in on them. Behind him, Amanda lay on the cot, her head propped against a pillow as she sipped a mug of tea Ethan had made. Eleanor was curled up in a corner near the fireplace, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but too afraid to sleep. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, sharpening a hunting knife with calm precision. "You said we need allies," Sam said, breaking the silence. "But you've been off the grid for years. How exactly do you plan on helping us?" Ethan smirked, the glint of the knife reflecting the firelight. "Just because I've been out of sight doesn't mean I've been out of the game. I've kept a few connections, people who owe me favors, military types, hackers. Not the kind you find on the dark web. These are people who know how to vanish and reappear exactly where they're needed. Sam raised an eyebrow, surprised. I didn't think you were still in contact with anyone. Kept it quiet, Ethan replied. After your brother died, I knew sticking my neck out would put me on Healer Tech's radar, but I never stopped paying attention. I've heard whispers about their illegal trials, but I didn't know how deep it went until now. We've got the proof, Amanda said, shifting to sit upright. Names, dates, locations, and internal memos. But we need time to get it to Dwyer, and Healer Tech isn't giving us that. Ethan set the knife aside and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. If I can get word to my contacts, they could create a diversion, something, to pull Healer Tech's attention away from you long enough for you to disappear and meet with Dwyer. Sam's fingers drummed against the windowsill, considering the plan. What kind of diversion are we talking about? Ethan's grin widened. The kind that makes them panic. Sam liked the sound of that. They spent the next hour mapping out their plan, the fire casting their faces in flickering light as they strategized. Ethan would contact his network and orchestrate an attack on one of Healer Tech's smaller research labs, a place tied to their off-the-books memory experiments. The goal wasn't to destroy the lab, but to force Healer Tech to divert their resources toward protecting it, buying Sam and the others a window of opportunity to escape. Amanda raised a concern as they reviewed the details. What if they see through the diversion? Ethan shrugged. Then we adapt. The key is to act quickly and stay unpredictable. Sam nodded, his mind already racing ahead to the next steps. We'll move at dawn. Once we're on the road, we'll head toward the meeting point Dwyer suggested. And if something goes wrong? Amanda asked. Sam's gaze hardened. We'll be ready. The night passed. Slowly, the hours ticking by like drops of water in a leaky faucet. Sam took the first watch, sitting by the window with his pocket knife. He kept his eyes on the forest, listening to the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional snap of a distant branch. His thoughts drifted to his brother, to the promise he had made to himself after the funeral, that he would find the people responsible and make them pay. This was it. His chance to finally keep that promise. When Ethan relieved him for the second watch, Sam lay down on the floor near the fire, his jacket bundled under his head. Sleep didn't come easily, but when it did, it was fitful and filled with fragmented dreams. Images of his brother, of Eleanor crying, of Holloway's smirk as he taunted him. Sam jolted awake more than once, the weight of the mission pressing down on him like a stone. By the time dawn broke, casting pale light across the cabin, everyone was awake. Amanda stretched carefully, wincing as she tested her ankle. Eleanor ate a small piece of bread in silence, her eyes still clouded with sleep. Ready? Sam asked, fastening the straps on his backpack. Amanda nodded, tossing her empty cup into the corner of the room. As ready as I'll ever be. Ethan grabbed a hunting rifle from the wall and slung it over his shoulder. I'll cover you until you're clear. Once you hit the main road, you're on your own. Thanks, Ethan, Sam said, clapping him on the shoulder. For everything. Ethan smiled, faintly. You do the same for me. The forest was quiet as they moved through the trees, the morning dew clinging to their boots and soaking the hems of their pants. Sam led the way, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of movement. The forest seemed peaceful, but Sam knew it was a fragile peace, one that could shatter at any moment. As they reached the dirt road where the car was parked, Amanda tapped Sam on the arm. Look, she whispered, pointing toward the tree line. Sam followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. A black SUV sat partially hidden among the trees, its windows dark and its engine silent. Two men dressed in black tactical gear stood by the vehicle, scanning the area as if they were waiting for something, or someone. They found us, Amanda hissed. Sam cursed under his breath. Ethan, do you see another way out of here? Ethan crouched behind a tree and peering through the underbrush. There's a narrow path that leads back to the river. We could loop around and... Before he could finish, one of the men lifted a radio to his mouth, speaking into it. Seconds later, the sound of distant engines roared to life, echoing through the forest. They've got... Back up, Sam said. We're out of time. Eleanor's eyes widened, and she clutched her backpack tighter. What do we do? Sam's mind raced, but only one option made sense. We split up. Amanda, you take Eleanor and head toward the river. Ethan and I will create a distraction and lead them in the opposite direction. Amanda's face twisted in protest. Sam, no, trust me, he interrupted, his tone firm. I'll meet you on the other side. Just get her to safety. Eleanor's lower lip trembled, but she nodded. Okay. Sam pulled her into a quick hug, whispering, Stay close to Amanda. Don't stop. Running! Amanda grabbed Eleanor's hand, her jaw clenched. You better meet us there, Kane. I will, Sam promised. As Amanda and Eleanor disappeared into the forest, Sam turned to Ethan. Ready? Ethan smirked and raised the rifle. Let's make some noise. They emerged from their hiding spot, sprinting toward the opposite end of the clearing. Sam fired off a flare into the sky, its bright red light streaking upward like a beacon. The men near the SUV shouted, their attention snapping toward the flare. There they are! One of them yelled. Sam didn't wait for them to act. He and Ethan darted into the forest, zigzagging through the trees as bullets tore through the branches around them. Adrenaline surged through Sam's veins, pushing him forward even as his muscles screamed for relief. Behind him, Ethan fired off a shot, the loud crack echoing through the forest. Keep moving, he shouted. Sam didn't look back. He could hear the men closing in, their footsteps pounding against the forest floor. But he pushed himself harder, weaving through the trees like a man possessed. When they reached a steep hill, Sam slid down the incline, dirt and leaves kicking up around him. At the bottom, he scrambled to his feet, his breath ragged. Ethan! He called out, but there was no response. Panic gripped him as he turned back, his eyes darting through the trees. Ethan! The forest was silent. Too silent. The air felt heavier, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Sam's boots crunched softly against the forest floor as he scanned the trees, his heart pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. The faint scent of gunpowder still lingered, mingling with the damp, earthy aroma of the woods. Ethan! Sam called again, his voice cracking. He couldn't see him, couldn't hear the familiar sound of his footsteps crashing through the underbrush. He retraced his steps back up the incline, each second dragging like an eternity. The woods stretched endlessly around him, the shadows between the trees shifting with the morning breeze. Sam ducked under low-hanging branches, his breath coming in sharp gasps as dread coiled in his chest. Then, he saw it. A patch of disturbed dirt, fresh boot prints leading off to the right. His eyes followed the trail and stopped on a crumpled figure partially, hidden behind a fallen log. Sam's breath hitched, and he sprinted toward it. Ethan! Ethan lay on his back, his eyes half closed, blood staining his flannel shirt. His hand was pressed against his side, where a dark, wet patch spread across his ribs. The rifle lay abandoned a few feet away, its barrel buried in the dirt. No, 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 Sam muttered, dropping to his knees beside him. He pressed his hands over Ethan's wound, applying pressure as his mind raced for a solution. Stay with me. Ethan coughed, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Damn, they got me good, huh? His voice was weak, but his eyes held that same mischievous glint Sam remembered from their younger days. Shut up, Sam said, his voice shaking. You're not dying on me. Ethan chuckled softly, wincing as the movement sent a jolt of pain through his body. You always were terrible at lying, Kane. Sam swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he applied more pressure to the wound. The bleeding wasn't stopping. We can get you out of here. I'll find a way. Sam, Ethan interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. You can't carry me and outrun them. You know that. Sam's throat tightened. I'm not leaving. You have to, Ethan said, his gaze locking onto Sam's. You've got something bigger to protect. Amanda, Eleanor, the truth. You can't let me be the reason you fail. Sam's vision blurred as tears stung his eyes. You don't get to make this choice for me. Ethan's hand reached up, weak but determined, and gripped Sam's wrist. You don't have a choice, he whispered. If you stay, we both die. But if you go, you still have a chance to finish this. Sam shook his head, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. I can't just leave you here. You've got to, Ethan said, coughing again. It's what your brother would want. Those words hit Sam like a punch to the gut, knocking the air from his lungs. Memories of his brother flooded back. The way he had laughed. The way he had always been the stronger one. The way Sam had failed to save him. He couldn't let that happen again. Not to Ethan. Not to anyone. Tears streamed down his face as he leaned closer. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry." Ethan smiled faintly, his fingers loosening their grip. "You're doing what's right. Don't stop." Sam hesitated for a moment longer, every instinct screaming at him to fight fate, to carry Ethan no matter the cost. But deep down, he knew Ethan was right. "I'll finish this," Sam said, his voice trembling but resolute. "I'll make sure they pay." Ethan's eyes softened. "That's all I wanted to hear." Sam wiped his face with the back of his hand, grabbed Ethan's rifle, and stood. He looked down at his friend one last time, memorizing the face that had been there through so many of his battles. "Goodbye, Ethan," he whispered. Ethan nodded, his eyes closing as he let out a slow, final breath. The forest around them seemed to pause, as if mourning the loss of the man who had just sacrificed himself to give them a fighting chance. Sam didn't have time to grieve. He had to run. He sprinted through the trees, his legs burning and his breath coming in sharp bursts. Every step felt like a betrayal, but he couldn't stop. He wouldn't let Ethan's death be for nothing. The rifle bounced against his back as he navigated the dense underbrush, ducking under branches and vaulting over fallen logs. The sound of distant shouting spurred him forward. The men from Healertech were still searching the forest, but the gunfire had disoriented them, buying him precious minutes to escape. When he reached the riverbank, he scanned the area and spotted Amanda and Eleanor huddled behind a cluster of rocks near the water's edge. Eleanor's eyes lit up when she saw him, and she scrambled to her feet, running toward him. "Sam!" she cried, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I thought you weren't coming." He hugged her tightly, his throat constricting. "I told you I'd meet you here." Amanda limped toward them, her face filled with relief and concern. But when her eyes flicked to the empty space behind him, her expression darkened. "Where's Ethan?" Sam's breath hitched, and he shook his head. He didn't make it. Amanda's eyes widened, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh, God." "There's no time," Sam said, his voice cracking. "We have to keep moving. He bought us this chance. We can't waste it." Amanda nodded, swallowing hard as she fought back tears. "Okay, let's go." Eleanor sniffled, wiping her eyes but remaining strong. She tightened her grip on Sam's hand as they waded into the river, the cold water rushing around their legs. They crossed quickly, their footsteps splashing against the current, and emerged on the other side, where a narrow dirt path led toward the road. Sam's mind raced as he thought about what came next. They needed a car, a way to get out of the area before Healertech closed in. But more than that, they needed to finish what they had started. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting back. As they climbed the hill and reached the road, the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, casting a soft golden glow over the landscape. Sam felt the warmth on his face, but it did little to ease the cold ache in his chest. He squeezed Eleanor's hand and looked at Amanda, who was breathing heavily, but determined. "We're almost there," he said. But even as he spoke those words, he knew the hardest part was still ahead. And this time, there would be no room for mistakes. The small, forgotten road stretched out like a thread unraveling through the countryside. The sun was fully up now, casting long golden shadows across the cracked pavement. Amanda sat in the back seat of the battered sedan, her ankle propped on the armrest as Eleanor leaned against her, fast asleep. The hum of the tires on the road should have been soothing. But Sam's grip on the steering wheel told another story. His knuckles were white, his mind racing. They had to get to Dwyer. The evidence Eleanor carried could end everything. The experiments, the lies, the power Healertech had, wielded unchecked for years. But Sam knew that delivering the files wouldn't be easy. Holloway and his men weren't just going to let them waltz into the meeting and hand over the truth. They would be waiting, hunting. "We're running out of time," Amanda said, her voice breaking the heavy silence. Sam didn't take his eyes off the road. "I know." She shifted uncomfortably, her hand brushing against the backpack at her side. Are you sure about this meeting point? It's too public. If they've tapped Dwyer's communications, they haven't. Sam cut her off, though the doubt gnawed at him. Dwyer's careful. He knows how to stay off their radar. Amanda sighed. Still, we're betting everything on this. Sam's jaw tightened. We don't have another play. Ahead, a worn sign indicated the entrance to Pine Hollow Rest Stop, a gas station and diner combo on the edge of town where truckers and travelers passed through without asking questions. Sam pulled into the gravel lot and parked near the side of the building, where they'd have a clear view of the entrance but wouldn't be easily spotted. Eleanor stirred in the back seat, rubbing her eyes. Are we here? Almost, Sam said. You did good, kid. She gave him a sleepy nod, but her face was pale, and he could see the weight of the past few days dragging her down. She clutched the backpack tighter, as if it were the only thing tethering her to reality. Amanda pulled out her phone and checked the time. Dwyer said he'd be here in 20 minutes. What if Holloway's men get here first? Then we'll make sure they regret it, Sam said, slipping the pocket knife into his jacket. He leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly. We stay alert. We don't move unless we're sure it's him. Amanda nodded, but Sam could see the same tension in her that he felt. She rested her head against the window, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. Eleanor's small voice broke the silence. What happens if we give him the files? Will they leave us alone? Sam's heart twisted, but he didn't lie to her. No, they'll still come after us. But the world will know the truth, Amanda added softly. And once it's out there, Healer Tech won't be able to bury it. Eleanor hugged the backpack closer to her chest, her eyes distant. I just want it to stop. Sam reached back and gently squeezed her hand. It will. The minutes dragged on like hours. Every car that passed by felt like a potential threat. Every shadow like an ambush waiting to spring. Sam's fingers tapped against the steering wheel, his nerves fraying with each second. Then, finally, a dark sedan pulled into the lot and parked a few spaces away. Sam tensed, watching the driver's side door open. James Dwyer stepped out, looking just as Sam remembered. Sharp suit, salt and pepper hair, and the kind of eyes that had seen too much but refused to blink. He carried a worn leather briefcase and moved with the confidence of a man who had made enemies before and survived. It's him, Amanda confirmed, her breath of relief matching Sam's. Let's do this. Sam grabbed the backpack and stepped out of the car, signaling for Amanda and Eleanor to stay close. Dwyer spotted them and nodded, walking toward the diner's entrance. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. A waitress cleaned the counter while a couple of truckers chatted over coffee in a booth near the back. Sam chose a table in the corner, where he could see the door and any potential threats that might walk through it. Dwyer slid into the seat across from him, setting the briefcase on the table. You weren't kidding when you said this was urgent, Dwyer said, his gaze flicking to the backpack. Did you bring it? Sam handed over the bag. Everything you need is on the laptop. Files, internal memos, video evidence. It's all there. Dwyer unzipped the bag and pulled out the laptop, opening it and skimming through the files with practiced efficiency. His expression darkened as he read, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Jesus, he muttered. This is worse than I thought. It's enough to bring them down, right? Amanda asked. Dwyer nodded, but his brow furrowed. It's enough to start the storm, but you'll be in the eye of it. Healer Tech won't go down without a fight. They'll come after you hard. We're used to that, Sam said. Dwyer leaned back, closing the laptop. I'll get this to my contacts. Once it's out, there's no taking it back. Good, Sam said. That's exactly what we want. Dwyer's phone buzzed, and he checked the screen. His face went pale. We've got company. Sam followed his gaze to the window, where a black SUV had just pulled into the lot. The same make and model as the ones that had chased them through the forest. Two men in suits stepped out, scanning the area. Amanda's eyes widened. They found us. Out the back, Sam ordered, grabbing the laptop and shoving it into Dwyer's briefcase. Go, now. They bolted from the table, the legs of the chairs scraping against the floor. The waitress looked up, startled, but Sam didn't stop. He led them through the kitchen, pushing past the cooks and out the back door, where the alley stretched toward a narrow side street. The SUV's tires screeched as it sped around to block their escape. "Get to the side street," Sam shouted. "I'll hold them off." Amanda hesitated, but Dwyer grabbed her arm and pulled her along. Eleanor clung to Amanda's hand, tears streaming down her face as they ran. Sam turned to face the two men charging toward him. His muscles tensed, and time seemed to slow as he calculated his next move. One of the men reached for his gun, but Sam didn't give him the chance. He lunged forward, driving his shoulder into the man's chest and knocking him to the ground. The second man swung wildly, but Sam ducked under the blow and slammed his fist into the man's gut. Pain shot through his knuckles, but adrenaline kept him moving. He grabbed the first man's gun and tossed it into the bushes, then sprinted after Amanda and Eleanor. They reached the side street where Dwyer's car was waiting. "Get in!" Dwyer shouted, throwing open the doors. Sam jumped into the driver's seat, flooring the gas pedal as soon as Amanda and Eleanor were inside. The tires screeched, and the car shot forward, leaving the men behind in a cloud of dust. As they sped down the highway, the adrenaline slowly began to fade, replaced by the crushing weight of what they had just done. Amanda sat in the back seat, holding Eleanor tightly as the girl sobbed into her shoulder. Dwyer leaned forward. From the passenger seat, his voice steady but urgent. "I'll get the files to the press. By tomorrow, the world will know what Healer Tech has done." Sam nodded, his hands trembling on the wheel. "What about us?" Dwyer met his gaze. "I have a safe house outside the city. You'll be protected until this blows over." Sam exhaled, relief washing over him. They had done it. They had made it this far. But even as the tension eased, he couldn't help but think of Ethan and the price they had paid to get here. "We're not done yet, Ethan. I'll finish this for you." The road ahead stretched into the horizon, uncertain and dangerous. But for the first time, they had hope. The air inside the safe house was still, heavy with anticipation. Sunlight streamed through the partially closed blinds, casting thin, golden lines across the floor. Amanda sat on the couch with Eleanor curled up beside her, the girl's head resting on her lap. She stroked Eleanor's hair, absent-mindedly, her gaze distant but determined. Sam stood by the window, watching the quiet suburban street below. The neighborhood seemed ordinary, filled with trimmed lawns and children riding bikes. But to Sam, it felt like the eye of the storm, too calm, too temporary. He checked his phone for the 10th time, hoping for the message that would finally end this nightmare. Dwyer had left the night before to deliver the files, and they hadn't heard from him since. What if something went wrong? Breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, but the fear in it was unmistakable. Sam didn't turn around. "Dwyer knows what he's doing. But if Healer Tech found him—" "They didn't," Sam said, cutting her off. He needed to believe that. If he let doubt creep in now, it would unravel everything they had fought for. Amanda sighed and leaned back against the couch, her fingers still running through Eleanor's hair. "I hate waiting." "I know," Sam muttered, pacing back and forth. His thoughts were a whirlwind of what-ifs. What if Dwyer had been intercepted? What if the files hadn't been enough? What if Holloway had another trick up his sleeve? The sound of a car pulling up outside made him freeze. His hand instinctively went to the pocket knife in his jacket as he peeked through the blinds. A familiar figure stepped out of the car, carrying a briefcase and wearing a triumphant expression. It was Dwyer. Sam exhaled sharply, relief flooding his system as he opened the door. Dwyer grinned as he stepped inside, setting the briefcase down on the kitchen counter. "We did it." Amanda sat up straighter, her eyes widening. "It's out?" Dwyer nodded. "The files are with 3 major media outlets. By the time the morning news cycle hits, everyone will know the truth about Healer Tech." Sam leaned against the wall, his knees nearly giving out from the weight of the relief. "What did they say?" Dwyer chuckled. "They were shocked, angry, hungry for more. I gave them everything. Internal documents, video evidence, testimony from Collins. There's no spinning this, Sam. It's over for them." Amanda covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling in her eyes. "We did it." Eleanor sat up, her gaze bouncing between Dwyer and Sam. "So they can't hurt anyone else?" "No," Dwyer said gently, kneeling in front of her. "You're safe now. The girl let out a shaky breath, and for the first time since Sam had met her, he saw the tension leave her body. Her shoulders, always tight with the weight of what she had endured, finally relaxed. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of release. Sam crouched beside her, wrapping his arms around her small frame. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing quietly. He held her close, his own tears slipping down his cheeks as he whispered, "It's over." Amanda joined them, her arms encircling both of them as the three sat there, bound by relief, grief, and the shared knowledge that they had survived something no one should have to endure. Later that evening, after Eleanor had fallen asleep, Sam and Amanda sat on the back porch, watching the sun set over the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the kind of sunset that felt like a promise of better days. Amanda sipped from a cup of tea, her gaze thoughtful. "I can't believe it's finally over." Sam rested his elbows on his knees, staring out at the fading light. "It doesn't feel real." "It will," she said softly. "Eventually." He nodded, but the ghosts of the past still clung to him. Ethan's sacrifice, his brother's death. The faces of the children Healer Tech had hurt. The battle was won, but the scars remained. Amanda set her cup down and turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "You did good, Sam. You kept your promise." He looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wish Ethan could see it." "He knew," Amanda said, placing a hand on his arm. "That's why he stayed behind." Sam's throat tightened, but he nodded. "I'm not sure where we go from here." Amanda smiled faintly. "We heal. Slowly, but we heal." A long silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes when words aren't enough to express what's in your heart. After a while, Sam stood and stretched, the cool evening air brushing against his skin. "I think I'm going to take a walk." "Want company?" Amanda asked. He shook his head. "I just need a minute." She nodded in understanding. "We'll be here when you get back." Sam walked along the quiet street, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on him like a heavy coat. The neighborhood was peaceful, porch lights glowing, kids playing basketball in a nearby driveway, a dog barking in the distance. It was a world far removed from the chaos they had just escaped. He found a small park at the end of the street and sat on a bench, the wooden slats creaking under his weight. The cool breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers, a reminder that life went on even after tragedy. Sam pulled out his phone and opened a photo of his brother, taken years ago on a camping trip. They were both smiling, arms slung around each other's shoulders, with the mountains behind them. "I did it, Danny," Sam whispered. "I kept my promise." He sat there for a while, watching the stars slowly appear in the darkening sky. For the first time in a long time, he felt something close to peace. The fight was over. The truth was out. And maybe, just maybe, he could finally start to heal. When he returned to the safe house, Amanda was waiting for him on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself. Against the chill, she smiled when she saw him, a smile that felt like home. "You okay?" He nodded, stepping up beside her. "I think I will be." Inside, Eleanor was still asleep, her face peaceful, free of the nightmares that had plagued her for so long. Sam watched her for a moment, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in years, hope. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, but tonight, they had won, and that was enough.